आम जो लैंग्वेज एक्वायरिंग डिवाइस अच्छी एलईडी बोली कहती मस्तिष्क लेफ्ट हेमिस्फीयर रे अच्छी सेठी कहुई माने परीक्षा कर देखा जाइए 12 वर्ष भितर जदि आप 4 5 7टा भी भाषा मन को से मस्तिष्क को देवे एक्सपोजर देवे से पिला को ताहले से मातृभाषा पर 4 5टा भाषा कहि पारिबो मातृभाषा परी जो माने मदर टंग परी कहि पारिबो एवं एक्वायर लैंग्वेज भी जन जदि आमे भाषा शिखिबा से एक्वायर लैंग्वेज भी परवर्ती काल रे शिखि कि बहु लोक बहु भल करिसंती केवल आमर जो रही जाउची जे एक पत्नी व्रत परी एक भाषा व्रत इंग्राजी जानिले विश्व विजय करिबी माने सेमिति आमे करिबा फल रे असुविधा होची।
आज्ञा धन्यवाद माने खूब सुंदर उत्तर थिला मबे रमेश सर को पचारिबी मो प्रश्न सर आमे दैनंदिन जीवन में आमे जो भाषा रे आमे कथा होचे आउ गोटे समय होचे आमे तो लिखुचे बही लिखुचे कविता लिखुचे कौन भी लिखुचे ये दुईटी जिनस भितर आमे पार्थक्य देखुछु तो ये जो दुईटा पार्थक्य एटा रहिबा आवश्यक ना आपे आपे रहुची ना आकु केमते आमे दूरै परिबा।
बहुत गुरुत्वपूर्ण प्रश्न पचारचंती बंधु या पूर्वरु हम कही रखें भाषा आहरण और भाषा शिक्षा ये दुईटा जाक अलग अलग कथा तापरे भाषा शिखिला परे आसीबो भाषा लेखा पढ़ा जेते बळे भाषा आहरण कथा हम कहू लैंग्वेज एक्विजिशन कथा कहू जो भाषा शिशु तार परिवेश रु आपे आपे शिखे अन्य मानकर बिना साहाय्य रे से प्रक्रिया को आमे कहू लैंग्वेज एक्विजिशन ए कथाटी मातृभाषा क्षेत्र में अत्यंत गुरुत्वपूर्ण अन्य भाषा जहाँ को से अन्य माध्यम रे शिक्षा दि जाए गुरुजन मान हूँ स्कूल रे शिक्षक हूँ शिक्षयित्री हूँ अन्य मान हूँ प्रत्येक भाषा रे 5टा तार मौलिक दक्षता अच्छी प्रथमटी हूँ शुणिबा तापरे कहिबा लेखिबा पढ़िबा बुझिबा एटा हूँ बेसिक स्किल्स गोटे भाषार जहाँ को आमे भाषा दक्षता बोली कहूँ आमे जेते बेले कहूचु गोटे भाषा तार आंचलिक प्रभेद मध्य अच्छी आंचलिक प्रभेद रहिबा स्वाभाविक कथा प्रत्येक 10 किलोमीटर भितरे गोटे भाषार प्रभेद देखा जाए ताहा ध्वनिगत बहुत प्रभेद देखा जाए जमती कि मोटे उदाहरण देवी ओडिशा रु बा ओडिया भाषा रु आमर उत्तरांचल रे से माने गोड़ कहि परिबेनी गुड़ कहिबे ओ तांको उच्चारण करिवारे कष्ट उ उच्चारण स्वाभाविक कथा दक्षिणांचल रे सेमती सोडा कहलबेनी सुडा से माने कहिबे तेणु किंतु गोड़ आउ गुड़ सोडा आउ सुडा या भितरे गोटे म्यूचुअल इंटेलिजिबिलिटी काम करे तेणु आमे से कहले आमे किसी परिमाण रे बुझी जाऊ जे से कौन कहबा को चाहती किंतु आउ गोटे पार्थक्य होची शब्दगत पार्थक्य आमर संबलपुर रे आमे एठी जते बेले टमाटो कहूचु बिलाती बैगण कहूचु से माने ताकू कहबे पातल घंटा आमे जते बेले कहूचु पियाज से माने कहबे उइल बा उली ये जो कथाटी घटे तार पृष्ठभूमि रे आउरी बड़ बड़ कारण अच्छी जोटा प्रथमे मु कहितली को भाषा को अंचल को भाषा सहित केते तांकर संबंध रही
मोर सर प्रश्न थिला
तेणु एबे आसुची एबे सेठी कि मु आसुची जते बेले आमे कहूचु आ लेखुचु आमे लेखिला बेले गोटे परंपरा को आमे अनुसरण करूचु कहिला बेले मध्य गोटे परंपरा को अनुसरण करूचु कहिला बेले आमे कथित परंपरा को अनुसरण करूचु लेखिला बेले आमे गोटे साहित्यिक परंपरा को अनुसरण करूचु तेणु एठी दीटा भितरे पार्थक्य होबाटा स्वाभाविक कथा किंतु ता भितरे गोटे म्यूचुअल इंटेलिजिबिलिटी मध्य काम करूची काहेकि ना गोटिए शब्दर गोटिए अर्थ नुहे तार गोटिए शब्दर मध्य अनेक अर्थ अच्छी काहेकि अच्छी तार कारण मध्य रही आमे जदि संस्कृत रु केते परिमाण रे आनिचे इंग्रेजी केते परिमाण रे आनीचे अन्य भाषा केते परिमाण रे आनीचे सेठी निर्धारण करा जिवो लिखित और कथित भितर पार्थक्य। तेणु ये पार्थक्यटा गोटे स्वाभाविक पार्थक्य, किंतु यार जो या भितर थिबा जो गोटे गैप बा फांक ये फांक को मोद लगेकरी ता ऊपर गोटे जो सीढ़ी तैयारी करिवार जो व्यवस्था साहित्य करे। साहित्यिक माने आंचलिक शब्द को आनी साहित्य रे से माने स्थान दियंती आउ से माने भाषार गौरव को बढ़ई थांती। तेणु ये फांकटा रहिबो आउ फांक रहिबा किंतु उचित नुहे। बहु आंचलिक शब्द साहित्य रे प्रवेश करी से साहित्यिक शब्द भाव रे परिगणित हेले ही आमर साहित्य विकास घटिबो आउ आम साहित्य बोधगम्य हबो। यह ही मोर उत्तर।
धन्यवाद सर, खूब सुंदर चमत्कार उत्तर थिला। मुझे रथ सार को पचारे चाहूँगी सर, बर्तमान आम देखुचे जगतीकरण जुगरे आमर आंचलिक भाषा को लेकिन बंचिबा केते गुरुत्वपूर्ण ना आम समस्त भाषा को लेकिन आम मातृभाषा को ता सहित बंचिबा और मातृभाषार गाथाटा को किपरि आम रखिबा ता उपर टिके आलोकपात करिवे।
मातृभाषार गाथा कौन प्रकृति रे एटा होची मातृभाषार जो संघर्षर यात्रा। कहीं ना प्रतिटी काल रे समय क्रमे मातृभाषा बदली बदली जाए, माने गोटे भाषा बदली बदली जाए। प्रतिटी मातृभाषा कहतु बा भाषार कहतु गोटे लंबा संघर्षर यात्रा रही। मु जो कहूली कहीं बदले, प्रथम कथा बदले भिन्न भिन्न सांस्कृतिक परिवेश भिन्न भिन्न क्षमता केन्द्र मान द्वारा प्रभावित होइकी एबे गोटे काल आसीची जेतेबेले इंग्राजी माध्यम रे भाषा आमर बदलुची। आपण माने समस्ते जानिचंती जे ओडिया एक स्वरांत भाषा जोठी जीवन समस्ते कहंती। मु किंतु एबे कौन से टीवी एंकर जो माने अछन उपस्थापिका जीवन कहबा आम गोटे अभ्यास हे गलानी हिंदी एवं संस्कृत प्रभाव एमती भाषा रे। एटा तो गोटे मु उदाहरण देली, एमती आपण शह शह उदाहरण पाइबे। भाषार ये मूल प्रकृति बदलिबा होची गोटे बहु माने भाषार जो व्याकरण व्यवस्था को से बदलैबार सामर्थ्य रखिছে, किंतु भाषार मूल प्रकृति न बदले आमको उपादान सबू भाषार जो नुआ मन किंतु आपण मोबाइल आसिला, मोबाइल को आमे मोबाइल भाव में कले किसी असुविधा नहीं, किंतु जदि एमिति बहुत शब्द आसीबो मोबाइल शब्द एवं ओडिया रे देखा जिवो जे 30% भाग शब्द मोबाइल परी हलंत लागिथिबा शब्द। जीवन जेमति मु कहली मोबाइल ट्रांजिस्टर एमती जदि बहुत गुड़ा शब्द आस चिप एम जदि नेबा ताहले हमको देखा पड़ो गोटे समय आसो आज को 100 वर्ष पर जिते लोके कहे ना ना ओडिया रे तो 30% शब्द होची कौन माने हलंत थिबा। केमती आमे कहिबा जे ओडिया भाषा एक स्वरांत भाषा आम कहि परिबानी। ठीक सेमिति अवस्था आसीची आमर संस्कृत पाई। आपण आश्चर्य हेबे ओडिया जो प्राकृतरू विवर्तित होइकी ओडिया रूप होइची सेथिरे एते संस्कृत शब्द गोटे समय आसीची कहीं ना सांस्क्रिटाइज होइची आमर जो बृहत्तर परंपरार कथा सब आसीबा फल रे। गोटे उदाहरण दउची, आपण कौनसी ओडिया शब्दर ओडिया देशज शब्दर आरंभ रे युक्ताक्षर पाइबे नहीं, स्कंध पाइबे नहीं, खांद किंबा खंद एमती कहबे के स्कंद कहबे नहीं, किंतु आमे ओडिया रे संस्कृत शब्द को आमे ओडिया शब्द करबा फल रे स्कंद एमती आपण जे कोनसी बहुत शब्द पाइबे जो शब्द रे युक्ताक्षर स्तंभ एमती बहुत गुडे शब्द आपण पाइबे जोटी युक्ताक्षर आछि। स्थान थान आमे कहउतिले समस्ते आपण देखिबे एनु बहुत शब्द पाइबे युक्ताक्षर इनिशियल माने प्रथम शब्दर आरंभ रे युक्ताक्षर ओडिया भाषा रे नथिला, ओडिया देश शब्द रे नथिला। संस्कृत रो अनेक शब्द आमे आनिले जार फल रे एबे आमे देखुचे ए इंग्रेजी रू भी आसिला, स्टेशन परि शब्द आसिला, स्टेशन आसिला, स्कूल आसिला, किंतु देखंतु पंजाबी माने स्कूल के एबे भी कहंती से। एनु आमर भाषार जो निजस्व गुणसूत्र डीएनए को बंचेवा पई एटा एक जरूरी आवश्यकता। आमे ग्रहण करिबा, आमे सब भाषा ग्रहण करिबा, ग्रहण न करी गत्यांतर नाही। गत्यंतर नाही आम प्रकृति जे ग्रहण न करिक ग्रहण करने को पड़ो किंतु सेठी आमर देखिबार अछि आमर डीएनए को भी बंचेबा को पड़ो एथिपई जो लैंग्वेज रो गोटे प्लानिंग लैंग्वेज एकदा कौन होतला ना भाषा समय परी नदी परी बही जाउथिला हम कहे ना भाषा नदी परी प्रवाहमान कह जाए किंतु एबे नदी परी प्रवाहमान हेले गाँ गंडा भासी जीव भाषा को एबे योजनाबद्ध भाव में प्रवाहित करने को पड़ो नदी परी प्रवाहमान जी जार बांकरे भाषा बदली गला सेटा हेबनी एबे आमको भाषा को योजना करने को पड़ो लैंग्वेज प्लानिंग से बहुत आवश्यक जोटा आस्ते आस्ते आमको बुझा पड़ो एवं सरकार कि जो मैंने क्षमता केन्द्र को बुझेबा पड़ो जदि लैंग्वेज प्लानिंग ठीक भाव में हेब नाही डेविड क्रिस्टाल जड़े लोक जे डेथ ऑफ माने लैंग्वेज डेथ विषय लिखिं से गोटे बढ़िया कथा कहते भाषा को जेमिति नेकी एबे मौलवादीपण प्रकाश पाउची एवं ता सहित राजनीतिक अस्मिता मिसुची भाषा को लेकिन गोटे युद्ध भारत में केबे देखा दे पारे से भारत प्रसंग कहते भारत प्रसंग ही से कथा कहते जे भारत में युद्ध देखा दे पारे आपण मैंने लक्ष्य करुवे तमिलनाडु से कथा घटिया आस्ते आस्ते जाऊँगी केतबेले घटी जाई पारे एणु भाषा एक आउ सहज सरल साहित्यर विषय नुहे यह अधिक अधिक राजनीतिर विषय।
धन्यवाद सर जेहेतु आम टे समय विलंब टे आम आरंभ करते समय हो गला परवर्ती सेसन किंतु यही कम समय भितर आम देखिले आम पाखक आम पाखे जी बस बेले बेले आम जापारूँ जे केते बड़ असाधारण कथा प्रकृत में सार आसवा सार जो असुस्थता थिला ता सत्वे सार कथा देले औषध नहीं भी सांगे आसते कारण भाषा प्रति सार भल पाइबा रमेश सार सांगे सांगे बाहर की आसिले तेणु आम समस्त सौभाग्य जे आम आज मातृभाषा उपर जो जो प्रश्न करते तार चमत्कार उत्तर आप जो देते जदि आम भितर कहार किसी प्रश्न अच्छी आम किसी प्रश्न नहीं पार मातृभाषा तेणु कहार किसी प्रश्न अच्छी कि मातृभाषार व्यवहार को नहीं केमती युवपीढ़ी करेंगे केमती कह आवश्यक ता तो प्रथम प्रश्न थिला ठीक अच्छे आम ए कार्य हाँ आज्ञा आज्ञा
एबे देखा जाइए जे सार कहले जो कथा से कथा को आउ टिके मु सप्लीमेंट करुच्ची विशेषकर क्रियापद रे भाषा रे बदलवाटा भारी गोटे दुखकर विषय तेणु आज हिंदी क्रिया एते ओडिया को प्रभावित करछि जे आमे समस्ते ये जो करिबा बा रखिबा ए रखिबाटा एते व्यवहार होइछि जे आमे कहूँ वक्तव्य रखंतु प्रत्येक मो कान आमर पाचिगले प्रत्येक सभा समिति रे जो माने एंकरिंग करुचंती बा संयोजना करुचंती से प्रत्येक जड़े कहीं आउ बाद पड़ूना जे आपण वक्तव्य रखंतु वक्तव्यटा केबे रखा जाई परिवनी वक्तव्य गोटे वस्तु नुह जे ताकू आम रखिबा तेणु यहाँ हिंदी रू आसला आपका शोध रखिए जो तांकर सेटा रही परिवो किंतु आमर ओडिया रे एटा रही परिवो नाही एटा होची ओडियार सबुठारु बड़ विशेषत्व जे आम भाषार जो बड़ विशेषत्वटा को आम किभली भाव में हरैवाई चाहूचे आउ युवपीढ़ी समस्ते प्राय तो अरे तटा हूँ गोटे इनडिक्लाइनेबल गोटे अव्यय पद तमें ताकू जदि बारंबार व्यवहार करिवो ताले कथार जो माधुर्य सेटा तो सेठी नष्ट हो गला तेणु सेठी नहीं कथा रखी जमा रखा जाई परिवनी कथाटा को आपण व्यक्त करंतु परिप्रकाश करंतु बा प्रदान करंतु जोटा ओडियार माने विशेषत्व आपण भाषण प्रदान करंतु आपण अभिभाषण दियंतु एगुड़ा न कहीकि आप रखिए कौन रखिए माने यहाँ कौन गोटे वस्तु ना जिनस ताको आनिक से रखिए तेणु यहाँ हिंदी रू आसला रखना ठीक अच्छे।
हेलो हाँ सर गोटे क्वेश्चन थी मन साई प्रश्न रथ छुआंकर गप को लेकिन मु काम करुच्ची
धन्यवाद
सेटा को लेकिन आप किसी कहीपर माने ओडिया रे छुआंक गप को लेकिन बनवा उपरे आउ बेसी काम करवा उपरे सेटा उपरे सजेशन किछि।
हाँ शुणु ए विषय प्रकृति रे ओडिसा रे माने विशेष चर्चा हेउ नाही एवं एटा गोटे बड़ दुर्भाग्य भी आपण पुत्र बहुत भल काम करूचंती मु आपन व्यक्तिगत भाव रे दी तीनटा कथा कहबी गोटे कथा हैला आपण माने छुआ मानकू हमर जो शिशु साहित्य कहिले आम मन भीतर धारणा दो हे जाइछि जे उपदेश देबा होछि शिशु साहित्य तार कारण आरंभ हैला मधुसूदन राव को ठारू एवं मधुसूदन राव को ठारू पिला मानकू ज्ञान देबा उपदेश देबा हेउछि शिशु साहित्य एणु सार कथा कौन शिक्षा पाइले यही सब प्रकार आमर गोटे परंपरा है किंतु एबर पिला उपदेश चाहू नाहंती एणु आमको उपदेश भितरे जमिति मेडिसिन खाऊ नथुवा पिला को आपण सुगर कोटेड मेडिसिन दियंती सेमिति से भितरे उपदेश देबे एटा गोटे प्रथम कथा द्वितीय कथा हैला जे आपण जेतेबेले भी शिशु साहित्य विषय किछि काम करूछंती आपण शिशुर मन को लेकी पृथ्वी को देखा पड़ो तृतीय कथा है शिशु साहित्य गोटे लंबा कहानी 5 वर्षर पिला ठारू लुलाबी ठारू नाना बाया गीत ठारू 14-15 वर्षर पिला युवक किशोर एटा को आपण स्तरबद्ध भाव में लिखा टार्गेट ऑडियंस फिक्स करने को पड़ो एक टार्गेट रीडर फिक्स करने को पड़ो क्या आपण क्या लिखुंट एवं आश्चर्यजनक भाव में ओडिया रे किशोर मानक पई लेखा नाही माने माने उत्साहपूर्ण एडवेंचरस किछि नाही अभियान पूर्ण किछि कहानी नाही एवं आपण एई सब बहुत जो खाली जगह अछि पूरण करि परिबे।
Now I will be requesting Sri Sudarshan Sahu Padma Shri Vibhushan sir to felicitate our guest speakers. So please. First, Dr. Santosh Rath. Sir. Now, Dr. Ramesh. Now, Dr. Ramesh Malik, sir. Now, I will request sir to please felicitate Shri Ved Prakash Naik sir. Sir, this way sir. We have it. Please sir. Thank you sir for the beautiful session. We learned a lot of new things. Thank you panel. Jai Jagannath. We will be starting the second panel in few minutes.
stories and muses over Mumbai. We are here to navigate the labyrinth of a city that is as much as feeling as it is a city of infinite contradictions. We have our beautiful panel with us, Mr. Musban F. Shaw, a writer whose work is practically synonymous to the spirit of this very city. His debut, Breathless in Mumbai, was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize and hailed by The Guardian as one of the 10 best books in Mumbai. With 7 push-chart prize nominations to his name, he has spent his career masterfully capturing the unnatural growth of the metropolis. Joining him will be Mr. Chirag Thakkar, Associate Publisher at Bloomsbury, India. With a decade of experience across houses like Penguin and Oxford University Press, he has championed voices ranging from Gulzar Sahab to modern contemporary icons, a writer and performance artist himself. So, without any delay, we will start the session. Sir, we have 45 minutes time for the session. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and congratulations to Team Kalinga for the 12th edition. It's only growing year on year, and it's so nice to be back here among such a wonderful, wonderful audience, and very glad to be in conversation with Musban Shroff, a writer that I had the great privilege of editing and publishing with his wonderful book, Muses of Mumbai. Musban, how are we feeling?
How am I feeling? Okay, guys, so to kind of get into the sentiment a bit, writing this is the most challenging job in the world, Chirag. And do you guys know why it's the most challenging job in the world? Because you got to make friends out of total strangers, okay? But there's one job which is even more challenging and which is fraught with challenges every inch of the way, and that's an editor's job. To my mind, I've always held editors to be philanthropists in disguise. And I'm very fortunate to be here with Chirag. I mean, he's an editor who reached out to me, and he impressed me not only with his credentials, but also with his impeccable manners. And I think there was excellent synergy on this book. And what was interesting was he was a Bombayite who had gone to Delhi. So he had the basis of comparison, and yet he chose this book. So I think that speaks a lot for the city. So great to be here, Chirag. Now let's get into the flesh and bones of the conversation.
Let's do that. You've come back to Mumbai as a city, as your muse, after your last celebrated, much talked about, infamous also in some circles, in some capacity, Breathless in Bombay. What does it really take for you to come back to a muse which is also a provider, which is also home, but keep a sense of distance from it, to be able to then fictionalize it and write a story around it, many stories in it?
So I'll tell you my trajectory. When I wrote Breathless in Bombay, it was my debut, and you know, my response to the city was different at that point. I was trying to put into perspective my relationship with my city. You know, because Mumbai is a city you love to hate or you hate to love. You know, there are aspects of it which are unacceptable. There are aspects of it which are highly addictive. So at that point, I was trying to figure out that what is my equation with Mumbai? You know, so, and to do that for Breathless in Bombay, I actually first traveled to the villages of India and tracked migration patterns. I stayed with villagers and tracked migration patterns into the city. And then I came back and started working with certain migrant communities, understanding their aspirations. So Breathless was my way of understanding my relationship with the city. As luck would have it, the book came out in 2008. It won a fair deal of accolades, and it was Commonwealth Writers shortlisting. It was rated by The Guardian as among the 10 best Bombay books. But as luck would have it, a year from them, I ran into some trouble with one of the regional right-wing parties, where I was kind of charged with trying to incite communal tensions. At that point, I wrote a novel called Waiting for John. I'm just taking you through a trajectory so you know how I came around to muses. At that point, while I was facing my cases in the courtrooms of India, I needed to work on a light novel which would keep me entertained and amused, and also I could answer two very serious questions. that how do you define success and can you really understand India? So I created a character-driven novel called Koshi, which reminded me of the genealogy of the city, its multicultural roots. So there were 5 friends, each from a different community, which is how we were in Mumbai in the 90s and in the early 2000s, you know? And it reminded me of what the city was, a sense of tolerance, a sense of acceptance. And I could answer these 2 questions in a light satirical way. So Koshi came out and it helped me to get through all my litigation. I won my cases conclusively. After that, we ran into the pandemic, at which time I wrote a book called Third Eye Rising, which published in the US and in Europe. And that was based on my travels to the villages of India, where I could look at issues such as caste, dowry, child apathy, female exploitation, migrant identities, the rural-urban divide. You know, I could explore all these very, very esoteric issues from the point of view of a city dweller. Having done that, it was 15 years since I'd worked on my own city, so I decided to come back to my home turf. But this time, it was very strange, Chirag, how it started. I think the first germ for Muses was set in the year 2008 during the Mumbai terror attacks. At that point, I woke up. When you see your city destroyed, when you see your places of your youth being decimated, you know, you're horrified. And that poured out as a lyrical essay from me, which got published locally and internationally. And that's when I woke up to what I felt for the city. Then in 2015, I was invited to London Short Story Festival, where I was asked, what is your relationship with the city? And there were writers from there was a writer from Vancouver, there was a writer from Johannesburg, from London. And I just blurted out that Mumbai was a mother city. She had all the benevolence of a mother whom you took for granted. And that's when I knew that I wanted to explore the metaphysics of a city, you know? And what are the metaphysics? The diversity, the bohemy, the empathy, the humanity of the city. And that's when I came to my home turf, which was very altered by then. You know, it was a city with a different skyline, it was a city with different issues, and that's what drew me back to Mumbai. Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about some of this, coming back to this new Mumbai that you then discovered when you came back to it. Of course, Mumbai has gone through its own crazy, crazy sense of transformation. It's surely transformed in my lifetime, your lifetime, and many lifetimes. And it's becoming more and more unrecognizable. It's becoming more and more also unlivable. As much as it is a muse that we romanticize, as much as we may want to, or some may want to hold on to the nostalgia of what Mumbai means today to people, it is also a city marked by great, great inequality and unlivability. Tell me, how has your muse, how has Mumbai changed for you right in front of your eyes?
That's an interesting question. So, a lot of changes actually. They've been seismic virtually, you know. Like you said, it's unrecognizable. So the first thing is it's a 360-degree change actually. So the first thing is that, you know, there were a lot of heritage trades which I had captured in Breathless in Bombay, Victoria walas, Malish walas, Bhelpuri walas, taxi walas. Now all those heritage communities have come under threat. The taxi walas are facing stiff competition from private operators. The Victoria walas have been banned. Okay, so there are only these electronic carriages, there are no horses. Okay, the Malishwalas have gone. More importantly, there are 2 very drastic changes which have happened. One is that, and which really rankle with me, is that 5,000 trees have been cut for the Mumbai metro. So on one level, it's very fashionable to say yes, you know, but the thing is there's development. But to my mind, no concept of development is complete without human development. You know, so I think, cutting 5,000 trees at a shot, it's sent temperatures bristling. You know, the other thing is that middle-class neighborhoods, which is the charm of any city, it's what gives your city a character, those are being effaced. So we have 6,000, at this point, we have over 6,000 redevelopment projects underway. And middle-class neighborhoods are just getting wiped out, which is what I tackled in a story called Neighbors. That, you know, so there are 2 Mumbais, there is Bombay Bohemy versus Mumbai Mayhem. You know, and there are 2 cities which are existing, and one is overwhelming the other and effacing it. So yes, there were a lot of changes. Now, how do I as a writer take to these changes? So I think it's with a righteous sense of indignation, but with writerly discernment. And this is, guys, this is what I want to put in perspective, and this is to answer Chirag's question directly. It is my job as a writer to make it abundantly clear that the Mumbai, the city, is very, very different. It's in conflict with its custodians, the evil trinity of builder, politician, civic official. So there is a beautiful city, it has its metaphysics, which is the diversity, which is the empathy, which is the humanity. And there is a city which is fast being sold out to the land sharks. I'll just give you guys a small example.
Please do.
Okay, what I call the soul of Mumbai. If you travel, I use public transport a lot. As a writer, I think that keeps me grounded. If you go on the suburban trains in Mumbai, okay, especially in the second class, which is the public compartments, no beggar will ever go untipped. It's always the lower income group which is looking after the lower income group, you know? If, when street hawkers are raided by the municipality, you know, they're immediately given shelter either in doorways of buildings or at construction sites. It's this whole thing about let's protect our own. Let people earn. This is again the soul of Mumbai. These are its metaphysics, you know. I was amazed to discover that in these wholesale vegetable markets, there's a different, I used to always wonder, dal going up to 200 rupees a kilo, how does my maid survive? How do people survive? I discovered that there's a different pricing system which exists in these wholesale bazaars. So the poor are actually given foodstuff at subsidized rates. Now, if I wasn't a flaneur, if I wasn't going out, meeting people and filing it away, didn't have my multiple antenna up, I would miss out on all this. And these are the metaphysics of a city. So what does a city deliver to us? It delivers safety and romance by day, and by night, and opportunities during the day. So that's what Mumbai. It's a very live and let earn city.
Yeah, it's a wonderful description of Mumbai, and one I can relate to. But it's also a city that is constantly trying to keep up. While the mother is, neglected mother or taken for granted mother is one image that comes to mind. But it also seems like an adolescent that is never ready, that hasn't transitioned to, let's say, from boyhood to manhood. Because my dominant memory of Mumbai is that it's always under construction and it's always trying to play catch up, right? The city is infrastructurally never ready. The city is housing-wise never ready. The city is amenities-wise, public utilities-wise never able to keep up with the demands that are made of the city, and of course the crazy migration, the crazy mobility that it sees into it and within it. So here is a city that is constantly trying to keep up with basic standards of livability, right? And New York comes to mind as an example. And one of my favorite writers, Fran Lebowitz, when Martin Scorsese asked her, what is it about New York that nobody's in love with it, but you still are? And it is extremely unlivable, and it's extremely chaotic, and it's highly, highly inconvenient. But yet you don't leave New York. The same thing can be said about Mumbai as well. As difficult as life is there for the many peoples and many classes and castes that live there, and the many Mumbais that exist within Mumbai, it is yet a city that is so giving that people don't wish to leave to chase something better elsewhere.
So, here's the thing. So, Mumbai is actually a city of polarities. There's, like Mr. Rushdie says, there's darkness and there's light. There's defeat and there is resolution. There's adversity, but there is empathy. So, now these are basically the elements of life. So, I think Mumbai is the quintessence of life itself. It prepares you for the push and tumble of life. So, it's not so much of what this city puts you through, but what it makes of you. Like Vivekananda says, the only right we all have is a right to self-realization. And that is what I think somewhere what Mumbai does, The issues are not going to go away. The issues are going to stay. There is going to be conspiracies of urban development. There is going to be destruction of green zones. But what is going to change is your acceptance of those issues. So I think that is what Mumbai does.
One striking thing that, Mumbai has going for itself is its crazy cosmopolitanism, right? It's the kind of khichdi, it's the kind of melting pot of people, of identities, of ethnicities, of languages, right? The second class compartment of the local train that you described. Every time you take a public transport in Mumbai, you're going to be able to hear tongues, you're going to be able to hear lehzas, you're going to be able to hear people expressing themselves in a variety of ways. And the Bhelpuri city has been able to go through its You know, it's dark periods, it's periods of light, it's period of thriving, it's period of glory, all because it's had diversity as a tenet, as a functional tenet at its heart. And of course, many have come in the years to claim that this city belongs to a community over another community, or it belongs to a community first before it belongs to others that may make a claim to it. And yet Mumbai's cosmopolitanism comes to rise, comes to the surface. Talk about that spirit of the city, which also inform all the characters of the book, the diversity.
Right. So I think the beauty about Mumbai is that it has a built-in resilience. It has a and I think it needs to keep redefining itself. Okay, and that is also because we are constantly in a race against the kind of metamorphosis it's going to. And this is a metamorphosis which is imposed on us. For example, this whole socio-economic structures, this whole elimination of neighborhoods, which is happening right now, you know? So it is clearly now the big question which I raise in the book also, that who does the city belong to? I think this is what Chirag is also saying, that people are claiming the city. But the fact is the city is generous enough to encompass all, you know? Whether it succeeds, whether it will thrive within that situation, we don't know. You know, we got to see, because right now it's a city in the throes of a drastic kind of a transformation. But one thing is that it has a certain built-in equanimity. It has a certain built-in acceptance. I'll give you an example there. Let me tell you a small anecdote. So, you know, sometime back, I got a notice from the municipality saying that I haven't paid my municipal taxes. And because of that, they're going to take away my house, then they're going to auction it, they're going to take away all my belongings, and plus impose a penalty order. I was like, what? I mean, I went and checked. I mean, I had paid all my taxes. You know, there was no issue about that. So I went to my first response was that I would speak to my lawyers and maybe dash off a letter to the housing board. Then I said, no, let me go and check it out, because maybe there's a story or maybe I'll learn something. So I went to the municipality, and there I found that, so they said that, I said, look, I've got this notice, it's quite drastic. So they said, sir, who's going to put you out of your house? Come, please sit, have a chai with us and all, you know. And they said, don't worry, you pay whenever and all that. So I'm saying, what was that about? Now imagine if my mother had been at home alone and she had received this and she had panicked, you know. But I'm saying, so, you know, it's this, on one level there's this agenda, but on another level it's okay, nothing really changes, you know, this total spirit of acceptance that no one's going to kick you out, no one's going to this thing. So I think somewhere this whole thing that let everyone make money, you know, let everyone thrive, you know. Don't take life too seriously. Yeah.
But let's contrast that with those who are getting evicted, for instance, right? Every time there is a shark or stakeholders involved that want to lay claim on a basti, on a mohalla, because the land that, what is called unregularized development or illegal tenements developments, that land may necessarily be of high importance given that land is so precious, right? And you're able to do that, but you're able to do that so beautiful. You write of characters and people that we've all known in high rises, in your proper pakka houses and buildings, and you write of people in the slums. Do they speak the same language? Are realities for them the same? Obviously, it's a rhetorical question. It's not. So what is this contrast like?
No, that's why I can cover the city, because I think it's very important. Like, for example, you know, one of the stories, I cover this benevolent Don. He owns like 2 alcohol dens. And yet at the same time, I go into his personality, you know, Kalyan Babu in Hafta, where he makes money out of illicit liquor and he bribes the cops. But at the same time, he sees himself as a protector to women. So it's really important that you understand human nature at that level. And, you know, Chirag, to answer your question, I'm really glad you brought this up, because civic activism, I think every writer does need to have a certain amount of activism in. And here I'm very fortunate because I think I have an editor who's also an overt activist, you know. So it's, in fact, the story I got sued for in Breathless in Bombay was exactly about this displacement issue. That I discovered that people were taken out of their homes and they were kind of packed into transit camps and they were left there for 20 to 30 years. You know, and those transit camps were like hellholes of existence. You know, there were no windows, no electricity. And what happens to those kind of people, you know? So that's an issue I tackled, for which actually I got sued. So, I mean, I obviously upset some people in the wrong way, yeah. But, so I think, yeah, it's kind of important to tackle life at both levels. May I read a small paragraph
I
from
was just
the
going to
last
ask you.
story to give a sense of what we are talking about?
Please
I think.
do. Read us a passage and we'll do another round of questions thereafter.
So this is a story called "The Earth Shall Be Enjoyed by Heroes." Actually, it's a very beautiful line by Swami Vivekananda. "The Earth shall be enjoyed by heroes," and sorry. So this is a story called "The Earth Shall Be Enjoyed by Heroes." It was inspired by this line by Swami Vivekananda, which was "The Earth Shall Be Enjoyed by Heroes," and I wanted to build a story because I thought this very appropriately captures what the whole spirit of Mumbai is. They came for him after his clinic had shut, his secretary had left, and the neighborhood, usually bustling with activity, was a pale shadow of itself, stunned and frozen under the streetlights. There were 3 policemen and 1 policewoman, and among them an older constable who was grim-faced but polite. "Sorry to trouble you, Dr. Sahib," he said from behind his whiskers. "You will have to come with us. There has been a complaint against you. Perhaps some mistake, surely some misunderstanding. But we have to investigate, you know." He avoided the doctor's eyes and stared at the floor unhappily. "Give me a few minutes," said the doctor. "You can sit in the waiting room. I will switch on the AC for you." He knew what this was about, or rather he suspected. Those damn builders, or was it those municipality guys? What did it matter? There was no difference between the two. Each was as insidious, as corrupt as the other. Look what they had done to his serene, beautiful neighborhood. Sent it under the hammer, sent it reeling till it was disfigured. And Dr. Sahib, who had grown up here, could recognize it no longer. Anyone else in Dr. Sahib's shoes would have been elated with the changes. Any other doctor, that is, because more development simply meant more patients, and more patients meant more money. Also, people who bought new flats costing upward of 50 million rupees wouldn't crib about a hike in fees. If Dr. Sahib had been a man of progress, if Dr. Sahib had been a shrewd man of progress, he'd be salivating at the changes. He would have braced himself to benefit from the boom. The truth was, he didn't see this rash of construction as a boom. He saw it as an epidemic. The virus of greed, as he called it, which had gripped the city's caretakers and driven them mad. Why else would they permit construction on small plots and narrow lanes? Why else would they approve plans for residential towers that were 20 stories high with 7 levels of parking? Why else would they sanction projects with no improvement to the infrastructure? Sheer madness, Dr. Sahib would think when walking to his clinic. I'm going to jump now here. The police station had been recently refurbished. Its walls were painted beige, its columns white. The corridor leading to the senior inspector's office was tiled with slabs of grey polished granite. Senior Inspector Bedekar rose to greet Dr. Sahib. He was a tall, dark man with a well-trimmed mustache. "Dr. Sahib," he said, "I feel so bad about this. I know you're doing God's work, but I had no choice, believe me." His voice dropped. "The matter is quite serious. You will understand when I tell you." He nodded to the others, who filed out quietly, except for the older constable with the whiskers, who moved to shut the room office doors. Now Inspector Bedekar spoke. "Dr. Sahib, we all know your reputation. We know how much service you do and how highly people think of you. We know you're a man of honor and that you have a large and kind heart." He paused and leaned forward, his palms locked. "But there has been a complaint against you, a serious complaint, and it is our duty to investigate. So I hope you will let us do our job without judging us or thinking too badly of us." "My dear Bedekar, why do you think I'm here? If there has been a complaint against me, it is my duty to respond. Now tell me, what do my enemies have to say about me this time? What is their complaint?" A light smile played on Dr. Sahib's face. Inspector Bedekar cursed softly in his mind. Sometimes he hated his job, especially when he had to investigate a complaint he knew he was false. He was sure Dr. Sahib was innocent, but the complaint was serious, and he wanted to act promptly before those presswalas got wind of it. Once that happened and the news broke, his hands would be tied. He would have to follow protocol. He would have to take Dr. Sahib into custody. So, this was a story which was inspired by an actual incident where a respectable doctor was actually framed. And when I delved into the matter of the case, I realized that he had been set up. He had been set up so brilliantly by a certain political party because there was a lot of land involved. He was fighting encroachments. He was fighting the municipality, and he was a successful activist. And at the end of it all, he gave up. So I wanted to see how, he was framed for rape, for molestation. So actually, I spent a lot of time with various assistant commissioners of police, getting the police procedure right, So this is the thing, that when you're writing, I write, as Chirag would vouch for, my work falls in the realm of literary fiction, which is social realism, which is delivered as emotionally taught narrative. So when you're working with that kind of stuff, you want to get your facts right. So I had to interview 4 different police commissioners, assistant police commissioners, to make sure I got the procedures right, to make sure that how this whole setup would be, And at the end, I think you present a case that, this can happen. And Inspector Baedeker takes it on himself, to kind of get Dr. Saib out of trouble. But the issues that I cover are a lot serious. It's about civic displacement. It's about the consequences of displacement, consequences of civic activism. And yet there is a mother who's implicated in this, who's trying to do the best for her children. Yes. So it's at 2 levels to answer your question that, so you have Dr. Saib, who's from a respectable singer of society, and there are these struggling washerwomen, who are just trying to get a house for themselves. And I think this is exactly what Chirag was asking. And I come back to the Vivekananda line, that the only equality we all have is a right to self-realization.
Wonderful. Thank you for that passage and for explaining the context behind that, Brisbane. You mentioned that, the kind of labor it takes to put a story like that together, right?
Yeah.
The kind of observatory hats you have to wear, the kind of detail you have to pay attention to be able to cull out these stories, to be able to cull out these characters with empathy, and also extend this empathy to your anti-heroes, to your antagonists, and people making a buck out of this, people making, the people framing a certain character, setting up a certain character for a larger ulterior goal. You also have to extend them, your empathy as a writer, without judgment. Empathy and source material collection being one, let's talk a little bit about craft, right? What all really goes into putting these stories together, right? What are the skills at work? What is the kind of labor and time it takes, right? For your characters to emerge, for them to sort of do their dance on the page until you're really happy for them to take home in a book.
It's very interesting because there is definitely a kind of a methodology which I discovered. And for me, that's been the real joy because for me, writing is a journey of self-realization and self-exploration. So what happens, the question I'm often asked is that what happens when you're working with characters outside your milieu? Can a person with a westernized schooling and a westernized background actually really understand what their patois is, what their thought process is? So I discovered that was why my trips to the villages which I took initially in the early 2000s, going and staying with tribals, was purely to sensitize myself, because I said, if I have to transform my writing, I first need to transform myself. And you don't do it as research, you do it as understanding where the other person's coming from. So it's not about you, it's about effacing yourself. So two ways to do this, to get into your character's shoes, to get into their minds. One is you first take a leap of faith, where your character trusts you implicitly to develop their life. And then you take a leap of imagination, where you use that character to depict a certain kind of an issue or a certain premise which you want to bring across here. So in the case of, like, for example, when I was doing work with the Victoria Walas, okay, so there were these horse carriages, I was surprised to discover that they were neighbors to sex workers, okay? So you had these Victorias, and you had these really kind of, Tonkawalas, and you had these sex workers, and then I realized that karmically, it made sense because they're both beast of burden. They're both taking on the burden of the city. Now if I had not spent enough time with them, I would not have come to realize this. I've done a lot of non-profit work in the realm of HIV and prevention and stuff like that. So I could work with sex workers, pimps, drug addicts, At the same time, I was interested in migrant communities. So, so you spend time with them. So the main thing is to get your facts right. And then, of course, craft is a matter of detailing. And I mean, I love revisiting my work. I'm a writer who revisits my work sometimes anywhere between 30 to 40, 50 times, So that, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what really, I really get off on that, you know. So it's like, you know, Flaubert, Gustave Flaubert's mother said a very interesting thing, which I think my mother can say the same. She said the pursuit of the perfect phrase desiccated his heart, because Flaubert used to like rework every page for 4 days, you know. So I'm not that obsessive, but I still put in a lot. So it's all about revising, yeah.
And at what point do you know that I need to have a distance now from the work? Because I've done my 30, 40, 3, 10, 12 readings and redrafting. At what, and is it difficult then? Because it's like saying a goodbye or a temporary sort of separation to a baby that you may have created, right?
No, you just instinctively know when you've thrown that grenade, okay, that I've delivered this epiphany, I've delivered this realization, you know. And even if you raise, I follow the Chekhovian model, which is even if you raise enough questions, that's fine enough, you know, even if you get your reader to think.
But it must be like a torment.
It is a torment.
Until you arrive at that
It
place,
is a torment.
right? And it's such a lonely place to be.
Yes. So this Russian writer, Isaac Babel, who was very interesting, he was actually, he was a short story writer who was killed by Stalin's secret police, okay, because his short stories were so effective. So he said, I would rather be hanged, I would rather be whipped in public than given a manuscript which I believe is not perfect, you know. So I think that's obsessive attention to detail is what really fires me up here. And I think, Chirag, to be very honest with you, I think I'm also a little competitive as a writer in that sense, you know, of getting my phrases right and getting the sound on the page. Right, you know?
I can attest to that.
Yes.
It's actually a delight. It's a real treat for both Jayashi and I, my colleague at Bloomsbury, to have, you know, it's not every writer is actually that as invested in getting every expression right and getting every single comma right, every single word and its place in the story right. Because it really makes us believe that to you, you know, writing has a kind of musicality to it, right?
Yes.
It has to be also a certain kind of dance, because once it's out there, it needs to have its own wings. It should be able to stand on its own. And it's going to outlive you and me both.
Yes.
Is it a time thing?
Yeah, sure, 10 minutes. Yeah, Q&A. Huh?
Yeah.
We'll come around to it.
So we'd love to invite some questions.
So sorry, just to compliment what Chirag was saying, that one of the challenges we all face, I mean, you know, publishing houses, writers today, that with social media, you know, the whole influx of social media and the proliferation of social media, reading today has become a two-dimensional activity. So the writer's job is even more challenging because you've got to provide that third dimension. And the thought that I would like to leave you guys with today is, what is the third dimension you expect from the writer, you know? So because otherwise reading becomes, it's just a two-way process, you know? So how does a book stand up to other more glittering forms of media? I think that is something we all need to deal with. And
we'll unpack some of this, but I just want to tell you guys, while we are, you know, going to do a round of questions, if you all have any questions and thoughts you want to ask us, please do. Think of your questions and we'll just come back to you to ask you if you have anything you'd like to share. Let's unpack what you just said, Murzban, a little bit. Oh, I poured you some water here in case. You know, today the writer is not the solitary figure that, you know, he, she, they once used to be. There is, of course, this maddening expectation that the writer today be a public person, that the writer today be a publicly available person, the writer be on social media, the writer make reels, make videos, post as often as they can, and be available to the readers, right? To be able to interact with them, to be able to have a conversation with them. And that solitary ivory tower, isolated sort of figure that the writer was once associated to be, writing in the hills on their desk, is no more what the writer today is. The writer is a very, for lack of other words, a very bastardized person, and almost is expected to be a content creator, an influencer, and all sorts of
performative artist.
A performative artist,
if you like,
right? Have you been able to make sense of this era, this connected, hyper-connected era?
It's really ironical that you are telling me this, because this reminds me of one of my initial conversations with Chirag, okay, which I'm always going to quote. So, you know, I told him, you know, so when we were just getting to know each other and we had this kind of meeting that what are we going to do after the book, and I told Chirag and the marketing guys, you know, guys, it's all very well, but, you know, for me, social media is going to be only about the book, nothing about myself. I'm very self-effacing. And Chirag, I remember, very patiently heard me out and said, you know something, Pasban, that all went out many years ago. okay? And he said, you have to be out there. And I think that was a call to conscience with Chiragi, which is always one of the fond memories of creating this book, yeah. That's why we need young editors like you to keep reminding us, yeah, that come out of your hole and, start to talking about your work. So I think, yeah, it's kind of important to demystify the process. It is really important. To what extent, I don't know. I mean, so there is, who sets the boundaries? Well, for that, I hope I get feedback from my publisher and from my readers. But yes, I think that needs to change. And I think it has to be more a question of sharing your work rather than projecting yourself. I think that is what is important, yeah,
And I think you've done very well. I want to say, I want to sort of
Thanks.
take a moment that I think and I was telling you outside when we were sitting, but just before we entered the session, it's been remarkable to see Murzban adapt to these times, adapt to the tools of our age, adapt to social media, and speak directly to the reader. Because there's really nothing like being open and honest and ready to sort of take, because these are just tools, right?
Right.
There's so much lamenting about the fact that we are in the age where print is dying, newsprint is dying, the critic, famously the critic is dead.
Yes.
So really you're looking at a kind of collapsing of boundaries and this sort of large ocean-like interconnected social media world that we are all in, which has also got its own cacophony. It's also got its own algorithm.
Right.
The algorithm is now everybody's god. To be able to sort of puncture through that, to be discovered, to be seen, that's the challenge a lot of us in the publishing world are dealing with, and I think you've risen to the occasion wonderfully.
Thank you very much. So, just to quickly share that, recently I had a bit of a jolt when I realized that Bob Dylan was going to be touring at the age of 86. And I said, if he can do it at this age, I mean, an artist always needs to get behind his work, yeah. But Chirag, do you have any insights, critical insights? Because you deal with this all the time with different writers. So where does one set the boundaries? This is something I would really love to know what your experience has been.
I think it has to be one that one arrives at in one's own time and through one's own process, right? Not everybody is going to be able to produce like lab rats, right? There are writers who are very comfortable. If you look at millennials, if you look at Gen Z, and if you're looking at the incoming breed of writers, that's going to be Gen Alpha, which are literal kids right now. These are writers, when they will write, they will not have had to transition to social media, will not have to transition to the digital age. One of my writers, Riya Chopra, says that all of us have a certain digital age in that sense. People born on the internet, people born with the internet are our digital elders in a way.
Right.
And we are way younger to
Right.
them in terms of, what our digital age looks like. But the boundary is something that one has to discover for oneself, really. I don't think there are hard and fast rules. Do you guys have any questions or any thoughts you want to ask us or share with us? Yeah, we have one here. There's an extra, okay, you've got a mic.
So as you have traveled through each and every square and corner of the Mumbai and you know more about Mumbai, so what's your perspective on Dharavi, the biggest slum? So they say that the area should be eradicated and redeveloped, and what do you say? What's your perspective about Dharavi?
It's a bit early to say it, but I just hope it's going to be equitable development. I mean, right now a lot of promises have been made in terms of rehabilitation, and it could go both ways, because very honestly what I'm seeing is that there is intention right now, okay? I don't want to just knock someone for the sake of for being an activist or feeling strongly, and I'm quite socialistic in my views, but the thing is I'm seeing intention, because we have certain people in power today who are from the grassroots. I'm talking regionally in terms of Maharashtra. And from what feedback I've been getting, yes, like the Koli community, there has been some kind of compensation to them. It's not as if they're just blanking them out. So similarly, even with the tanners and all, I'm really hoping the opportunity is that you give these people a sustainable life. Like, so you have a public hospital within that. You have schools within that. You address issues of alcoholism within that. So there's so much scope. So I think that effort is not there because you're not ready to work with NGOs. You think that you can do it all, and the capitalists are going to take care of it, which is not going to happen. But there is effort, which we had not seen. There is intention, which we had not seen earlier. Earlier, there was this let the whole thing simmer. It's a tourist attraction, theek hai, you know. So it's too early to say, but I hope that, you know, something good comes out of it, you know.
Just to add to that, there's a certain kind of design and style to how slum redevelopment happens in Bombay, right? One of the things that has always irked me is that when large builders and real estate groups, what I call land mafias or land sharks, along with governments, try and acquire land in the name of slum redevelopment, there is this disdain they have for the very people who live there, right? And when land is acquired and when large buildings are erected there, they prefer that the same people that they have displaced don't live in the same buildings. They are given plots or homes or monies, and they would much rather these people live elsewhere, on the outskirts, get out of their sight, right? If Dharavi, the proposed Dharavi redevelopment plan, also had similar intentions where they want to displace residents of Dharavi, which is such a complex, sophisticated ecosystem of labor, of crafts, of sensory intelligence, right? It's not a simple thing as these people don't have access, these people are poor, these people don't have sanitation, hygiene, etc. They're causing disease, etc. It's far more layered and far more complicated. And any notion of redevelopment in a place like Dharavi must look at solutions which are collaborative and community-led instead of an outsider, a top-down approach of somebody with power coming and saying, we will tell you how you need to live. Why don't you live? Why don't you vacate this land and then we'll get back to you on that, right? There's always this kind of, in terms of motive itself, right? In terms of intent itself, there is definitely the burden of making sure that the actors or people with larger amount of power in this equation need to be held accountable, right? Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah? And that's about the time we have, so we'll take one, maybe two questions and wrap.
There's a remark and a question as well. Muzban sir, you are my inspiration. And there's a question that is, are you thinking to assess other corners of other cities as well, slums?
Well, not so much cities as maybe more pan-India issues, yeah, you know. So like my collection Third Eye Rising did cover a lot of tribal India. It explored the urban-rural divide, you know. So a lot of those kind of issues. I've got a novel on one of the most marginalized communities in India coming up. So I think it'll always be character-driven, issue-driven, but maybe not specifically cities, because I really would need to live there and sort of get into it intravenously if I have to write about it, you know. So I don't want to be the outsider, just working from a sense of observation, but definitely certain issues related to. So you know, there are two kinds of writing. One is writing which is within your milieu, and there's the other kind of writing which is what I call close to home, close to the bone, where you actually delve very deep, do a deep dive into human nature and human psychology, and you explore certain aspects of that. So these are the two kinds of writing I'm more interested in.
Thank you. Okay. If there's any other question, we'll probably take one at best, or we're good to wrap. All right. Thank you, everyone, for very patiently sitting with us, participating in this discussion, humoring us, and choosing to spend your morning with us. Copies of Murzban's book, Muses over Mumbai, are sold in Mayfair Lagoon. You can get a copy, get him to sign it for you. We're going to be hanging around here at the festival, so if you thought of a question that you didn't get to ask, or you want to come share your views later, please find us. We're happy to have a chat.
Don't hesitate to intercept us and ask us anything. Yeah, you know.
And thank you, Murzban,
No,
for
my
being
pleasure,
the
Chirag.
wonderful writer you are,
Thank
the
you,
gifted
Chirag.
storyteller that you are, and for trusting me with this book.
No, and thank you for finding me out and reaching out. Thanks a lot, Chirag. It's been wonderful, yeah, you know. So
Thank you, sir, for your insights. Like turning a city into a story is a really thing that we can't think of. Thank you for, sir, your insights. So I would like to request Anil, sir, to felicitate our guests. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
सभी को मेरा नमस्कार और जय जगन्नाथ। कवि की बात तो कविता ही जाने, क्या मधुर, सुनने में ही बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है। हमारे साथ बहुत सारे कवि भी बैठे हैं। कवि के भावना, विचार और उसकी आंतरिक यात्रा को केवल कविता ही पूरी तरह से समझ सकती है, जो आज के पैनल का विषय और थीम भी है। सभी अतिथियों को मेरा जय जगन्नाथ एंड ए वेरी वार्म वेलकम टू एवरीवन प्रेजेंट ओवर हियर। वैसे तो यहाँ मंच में उपस्थित सभी पैनलिस्ट परिचय के मोहताज नहीं हैं, फिर भी पैनल का एक संक्षिप्त परिचय मैं आप सबको ज़रूर देना चाहूँगा। गौर फरमाइएगा। सर्वप्रथम हमारे साथ हैं माननीय जाने माने लेखक, कवि, लघु कथा लेखक श्री गीत चतुर्वेदी जी। अब मैं क्षमा चाहता हूँ, हमारे साथ एक पैनलिस्ट ज्वाइन नहीं कर सके, उनका फ्लाइट थोड़ा डिले हो गया। आई एम वेरी सॉरी फॉर दैट। अब मंच की गरिमा को बढ़ाने के लिए हमारे साथ हैं माननीय यश मालविया जी, जो कि एक कवि और गीतकार भी हैं। अब आई विल रिक्वेस्ट आवर मॉडरेटर श्री मनीषा कुलश्रेष्ठ जी, जो कि एक प्रसिद्ध उपन्यासकार और कहानी के लेखक भी हैं, और उम्मीद है आने वाले 40 मिनट हम सब के लिए बहुत ही शानदार होंगे। और नाउ आई विल लाइक टू टेक ओवर, आई विल रिक्वेस्ट मैम टू टेक ओवर।
धन्यवाद। आप सबका स्वागत है इस कलिंगा लिटरेचर फेस्टिवल के इस महत्वपूर्ण सत्र में, जिसमें हमारे साथ यश मालवीय जी हैं और मेरे प्रिय साथी और समकालीन गीत चतुर्वेदी हैं। और यश जी जिनके बारे में हम बात करें तो उन्होंने नवगीतों के, अगर हम कहें तो भागीरथ कह सकते हैं, और गीत ने अपनी एक अलग लीग खड़ी की। गीत आए हमारे साथ थे, लेकिन उन्होंने अपना रास्ता इतना अनूठा बनाया, उनकी लेखनी ने एक अलग ही मोड़ लिया कि जो हम सबको चकित करता है। तो आज मुझे एक कथाकार को जिम्मा दिया गया है कि मैं 2 कवियों से बात करूं, इसलिए मैं थोड़ी सी असहज तो नहीं हूं, क्योंकि गीत मेरे मित्र रहे हैं और यश जी से सुबह बात हो रही थी तो मुझे लगा कि इतनी सरलता कितनी दुर्लभ है। तो मुझे लगता है कि ये बातचीत बहुत मज़ेदार होने वाली है, क्योंकि मैं भले ही कथाकार हूँ लेकिन मेरा पहला प्रेम कविता है। तो मैं सबसे पहले यश जी से बात करूँगी कि यश जी, जब लोग बहुत छंद मुक्त कविताएं लिख रहे थे और कविताओं की एक आधुनिक पकड़ बन रही थी और लोग अकविता की बात कर रहे थे, ऐसे समय में आपने नवगीत चुना। क्या ये आपका संगीत और लय के प्रति कोई खास प्रेम था जिसकी वजह से आपने इस नवगीत को चुना और इसमें आपने जीवन भर काम किया? बल्कि आपकी जो छंदमुक्त कविताएं हैं उनमें भी मैं और गीत बात कर रहे थे कि एक सुंदर सी मीठी सी लय रहती है, कुछ बताएं।
मैं भाई गीत को देख रहा हूँ और मैं गीत लिखता हूँ मेरे लिए, और मेरे हर गीत के पीछे एक कहानी होती है। तो ये कहानीकार हमारे बगल में बैठे हुए। पुरानी धड़कनों का मोल दे दो, हमारे हाथ में कशकोल दे दो। कहानी है तनी रस्सी सरीखी, कहानी में जरा सा झोल दे दो। हमें इतिहास से निस्बत नहीं है, हमारे वक्त का भूगोल दे दो। मुझे याद आता है कि पिता उमाकांत मालवीय उन दिनों धर्मयुग में हर दूसरे तीसरे अंक में उनके गीत छपा करते थे। तो एक तरह से बचपन से एक लय में बंधा वातावरण मुझे मिला। थोड़ा और बड़ा हुआ, बच्चों की कविताओं से शुरू की। जैसे मैं आया हूँ अब यहाँ, तो मुझे अपनी याद आ रही वो कविता, मेरी प्यारी प्यारी गुड़िया सीखे खूब असमिया उड़िया। तो और बच्चों की कविताओं से शुरू करके पिता ने कहा कि देखो, अगर बच्चों पे लिखना है तो बच्चा हो जाना पड़ता है। तो रिश्तों नातों पे लिखा है। आज नानी जी पे कविता की बात हो रही थी। टीवी की शौकीन हमारी नानी जी, खाती हैं नमकीन हमारी नानी जी, बिन साबुन पानी जाड़े के मौसम में होती ड्राई क्लीन हमारी नानी जी। जितना नया नया नाती है गोदी में, उतनी है प्राचीन हमारी नानी जी। और चढ़ा पेट पे मिट्ठू तबला बजा रहा, ताक धिना दिन धीन हमारी नानी जी।
क्या बात है।
तो मुझे ये लगा कि ये कविता समय जो है वो मुक्त छंद की ओर जा जरूर रहा है, लेकिन कविता का छंद कहीं ना टूटे। महादेवी जी ने, ये सामने बैठी हुई हैं, महादेवी जी ने हम लोग की शादी का कार्ड लिखा था। हमारे जो ददिया ससुर थे, उन्होंने ही सबसे पहले निराला को महाप्राण कहा, गंगा प्रसाद पांडे। वो उनकी स्थिति ये थी कि वो छायावाद के एकदम शुरुआती आलोचकों में रहे। उन्होंने ही महादेवी जी को सबसे पहले महिषी कहा। तो हम जब उनके पास गए, महादेवी जी के पास, तो महादेवी जी ने कहा कि भाई तुम गीत लिखते हो कि कुछ अखबार की कतरन नुमा लिखते हो, क्योंकि कविता नहीं जीवन का भी छंद टूट रहा है। बाबा नागार्जुन कहते हैं कि छंद की कविता आम आदमी से जुड़ती है। हमारे इलाहाबाद में जगदीश गुप्त कहा करते थे, कविता नए मनुष्य की प्रतिष्ठा करती है। और जब हम क्यों ऐसी बात है, हमें गीत चतुर्वेदी की कविता तो अखबार की कतरन नहीं लगती, क्योंकि अर्थ की लय की बात होती है। अर्थ की लय अगर है आपकी कविता में, तो बच्चों के लिए लिखते 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 शहर में इलेक्शन था और सब अनाउंस करते घूम रहे थे कि हमें वोट दो, हमें वोट दो, हमें वोट दो। एक बच्चा लोकतंत्र में भागीदारी चाहता है। वो कहता है कि हमें वोट दो, हम सब चिल्लाते, पर हम हैं मजबूर, हम बच्चों के वोट न देने का गड़बड़ दस्तूर। हमें वोट ही नहीं देना, हम क्या करेंगे, लोकतंत्र में हमारी क्या भागीदारी होगी। तो फिर बोले कि सर्वेश्वर दयाल सक्सेना ने पत्र लिखा कि देखो तुम्हारी एक कविता हमको मिली है, तुम इसके साथ अगर स्केच भी भेज दो तो मज़ा आ जाए। तो जिंदगी का पहला स्केच और पहली कविता पराग में उन्होंने छापी। देखा चिड़िया घर में जेबरा, लगा रहा था वो अलजेबरा। तो कह रहे कई बार ऐसा होता है कि तुक जो है, एक तो होता है कि आप तुक्कड़ हो गए और तुकाराम शैली के कवि हो गए, तुक मिलाने लग गए। लेकिन कई बार ऐसा होता है कि तुक हमारी सोच को एक दिशा देते हैं, अगर केवल तुक मिलाने के लिए नहीं रखे गए हैं तो मैं छंद में लिखता हूँ, लेकिन छछंद से परहेज करता हूँ, क्योंकि छछंद में कविता खो जाती है। लगातार यात्राओं में रहना होता है, बाहर रहना होता है। तो एक बार हम किसी कवि सम्मेलन में गए तो एक एक के चेहरे कौंध रहे थे। मेरा छोटा सा बेटा था और चलते समय वो लिपट गया था कि न जाओ पापा, लेकिन जाना था, क्योंकि अजामिल की एक कविता है जिसमें वो कहते हैं कि एक ऐसी कविता लिखना चाहता हूँ जिसे रोटी में तब्दील कर सकूँ। तो मैं जन आंदोलनों में भाग लेता था, एक बार सस्पेंड हो गया, तो मैंने कविता से अपनी रोटी भी अर्जित की है। तो सोच रहा, अब सबके चेहरे याद आ रहे थे, कभी बहन याद आ रही थी, कभी पिता याद आ रहे थे। सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन, आंगन में तुलसी का बिरवा झूम रहा होगा, घुटनों पर घर भर में बेटा घूम रहा होगा, लेकिन नींद ना आई होगी उसको मेरे बिन, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन। कंघे में सिंदूर लगाकर मांग भरी होगी और दर्पण के आगे जाते ही आंख भरी होगी, पोंछ लिए होंगे पल्लू से आंसू के पलछिन, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन। घर आई बहना भी बिटिया सुला रही होगी, आ मामा कहकर बुला रही होगी, सरक रही हैं बोझिल घड़ियां छवियों को गिन गिन, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन, भूल भूल कर माँ हमको ही टेर रही होगी, भूल भूल कर माँ हमको ही टेर रही होगी, अनमन सी बैठी बस माला फेर रही होगी, भूखी रही स्वयं और हमको दिया दूध का ऋण, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन, भाभी ने दुलार के मेरे कितने नाम धरे, भाभी ने दुलार के मेरे कितने नाम धरे, उसकी मीठी छेड़छाड़ अब यादों में अखरे, अब भी भैया से 100 नखरे, जैसे हो कमसिन, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन, बाबू ने मुश्किल से मुंह में कौर धरा होगा, भरा भरा घर होगा मन भी भरा भरा होगा, कई घरेलू बातें मन में चुभो रही हैं पिन, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन, सोच रहा परदेसी कैसे होंगे घर के दिन।
अद्भुत। मतलब हमें जो नवगीतात्मकता है उसका हमें पूरी एक चित्रमाला देखने को मिल गई कि कैसे छोटी छोटी चीज़ें यश जी की कविताओं में आती है, कैसे अपना परिवार हम सबके आगे नाच जाता है और कैसे सारी चीज़ें बहुत दृश्यात्मक हो जाती हैं। तो मुझे गीत की एक बात याद आ रही है, मुझ में अर्थ मत खोजना, मैं किसी प्रतीक में प्रवेश हो नष्ट नहीं होना चाहता। तो ये बात यश जी के संदर्भों में भी उतनी ही सच है। तो गीत तुम जैसे मुझे याद है कि हम सब कहानीकार पहले थे, मतलब लेकिन तुमने दोनों नावों पे पैर रखा, तुमने दोनों नावों को उतनी अच्छी तरह से साध लिया, वरना हमेशा ये होता है कि एक नाव डूब जाती है। और तुम उतने ही लोकप्रिय, बड़ों में भी हो, बच्चों में भी हो, और जेनजी भी तुम्हारी फ़ैन है। तो ये जो पंक्ति है तुम्हारी, तो इसके संदर्भ में मैं तुम्हारा सोचना, तुम्हारा दर्शन जानना चाहूँगी कि कैसे बहुत छोटी चीज़ें तुम्हारे यहाँ भी आती हैं। और जैसा कि तुम यहाँ कह रहे हो कि मैं किसी प्रतीक में प्रवेश कर नष्ट नहीं होना चाहता, और अर्थ भी है, तो वो अर्थ बहुलता तुम्हारे यहाँ कैसे आती है और इसको तुमने कैसे साधा। और मैं इसी के साथ जानना चाहूँगी कि तुम आए कहानी में थे या कविता में आए थे, फिर कहानी में आए, फिर कविता में, और फिर नॉन फिक्शन में भी। तो ये एक जो सफ़र है इसके बारे में भी, तो ये आवाजाही कैसी थी, ये संतुलन कैसा था। तो पहले हम प्रतीक वाली वो बात जो तुमने कही है वो क्या संदर्भ है, उस पर कुछ खुलासा करो।
पहले वो बात जो मैं कहना चाहता हूँ।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, स्वागत है।
देखिए, मेरे लिए ये एक सौभाग्य की बात है कि मैं यश जी के साथ, यश मालवीय के साथ मंच शेयर कर रहा हूँ, मेरी बहुत प्यारी मित्र मनीषा के साथ मंच शेयर कर रहा हूँ। तो दोनों, अरे हाँ। और ये बातचीत शुरू करने से पहले मैं एक ऐसे शख्स को याद करना चाहता हूँ जो अभी 2 दिन पहले इस दुनिया में नहीं रहे। हिंदी के बहुत बड़े कहानीकार थे, ज्ञान रंजन। और जब मैं 17 साल का था तब से मुझे ज्ञान रंजन का स्नेह प्राप्त हुआ है। जब मेरी कविताएं एक किसी जगह नहीं छपी, तब से मेरे पास ज्ञान रंजन की चिट्ठियां पड़ी हुई हैं, और मेरी दूसरी कविता ही ज्ञान रंजन ने प्रकाशित की थी। और जैसे अभी उन्होंने कहा नावों की बात, तो उन्होंने ज्ञान रंजन ने शमशेर बहादुर सिंह, जो हिंदी के बहुत बड़े कवि थे, उनके बारे में कहा है एक जगह, शमशेर की आँखों की तारीफ करते हुए, कि जब मैं शमशेर बहादुर सिंह को देखता हूँ तो मुझे उनकी आँखें पानी में चलती हुई नाव जैसी लगती हैं। मैं अभी याद कर रहा था, अब इससे बड़ा कवि कौन होगा, इतनी सुंदर पंक्ति। मैं ये कहूँ, अंग्रेज़ी के एक आलोचक हैं हैरल्ड ब्लूम, अमेरिका के, वो कहते हैं कि 20वीं सदी की सबसे सुंदर कविताएं गद्य वालों ने संभव की हैं। सबसे सुंदर काव्यात्मक पंक्तियां उपन्यास लिखने वालों ने लिखी हैं। तो मुझे विनोद कुमार शुक्ल की वो पंक्ति याद आ जाती है कि उपन्यास में पहले एक कविता रहती थी। तो जब मनीषा ने अभी कहा कि मैं गद्यकार हूँ, तो मुझे वही याद आया कि ये ऐसी गद्यकार हैं जो गद्य के भीतर कविता संभव करती रही हैं। और मैं अपने पूरे रचनात्मक जीवन में ऐसे गद्यकारों को पढ़ते हुए बड़ा हुआ हूँ जिन्होंने गद्य के भीतर कविता संभव की, जो जान ही नहीं पाते कि कविता दरअसल संभव कहाँ से होती है। मुझे अथर्ववेद का एक श्लोक याद आ रहा है जिसका अर्थ ये है कि ये पूरा संसार किसी के द्वारा रची गई कविता है। और नासदीय सूक्तम में इसी बात का एक अलग पटाक्षेप है कि अगर ये पूरा संसार किसी के द्वारा रची गई कविता है, जो अध्यक्ष है खुद उसे नहीं पता कि क्या ये कविता है या नहीं है। ये जो एक रहस्य है, ये कविता के साथ जो जुड़ा हुआ है, जो गालिब भी कहते हैं कि ये जो सारे ख्याल हैं, ये मज़ामी जो हैं, ये किसी गैब से आते हैं, किसी एक ऐसी जगह से आते हैं जिन्हें हम जानते ही नहीं हैं, जहाँ तक पहुँचना हमारे लिए संभव नहीं है। तो वो जो जगह है कविता के बारे में, वो न हम जानते हैं, न गद्यकार जानता है, न कवि जानता है, न पाठक जानता है। वो अनुभूति का ऐसा एक भूगोल है, ऐसा एक क्षेत्र है जहाँ जाने की कामना हम सबके भीतर होती है, जहाँ का एक काल्पनिक नक्शा हमारे भीतर होता है, लेकिन हम उसे जानते नहीं हैं। और हमारी कविताएं, चाहे वो छोटी डिटेल लेकर के बने या एक बड़े विषय को संबोधित करें, उसी अनजानी जगह से, उसी एक सांस्कृतिक भूगोल से आ रही होती हैं, ऐसा महसूस होता है मुझे।
यश जी, आपका नया कविताओं का संकलन आया है, काशी नहीं जुलाहे की, और इसका शीर्षक सुनते ही लगता है, कबीर याद आते हैं कि काशी तो जुलाहों की थी, तो फिर ये काशी जुलाहों की क्यों नहीं है? तो मैं इसके बारे में जानना चाहूँगी।
मैं पिछले दिनों काशी गया तो 80 घाट का रूप बहुत बदला हुआ लगा। मुझे लगा कि काशी में काशी ही नहीं दिखाई दे रहा है। काशी का 80 में जिस 80 घाट की बात की है काशीनाथ सिंह ने, वो काशी कहाँ गया? दिल्ली होती जाती सूरत 80 के चौराहे की, सत्ता की मिल्कियत हो गई काशी नहीं जुलाहे की। मुझे लगा कि इलाहाबाद में इलाहाबाद नहीं रहा जा रहा है, बनारस में बनारस नहीं रहा जा रहा है। तो हम अपनी संस्कृति से किसी एक होड़ में दूर हो रहे हैं, तो वो कैसे मिलेगा हमें? हमारा कबीर कैसे मिलेगा हमें? हमारा वो जुलाहा कैसे मिलेगा? और हम जो है वो बस अभिशप्त हैं केवल मतदान करने के लिए। मेरे भीतर एक राम सुभग रहता है। आप में से कोई राम सुभग हो तो माफ करेगा, मैं अपने भीतर के राम सुभग की बात कर रहा हूं। आओ भाई राम सुभग, आओ भाई राम सुभग, दरी बिछाओ राम सुभग, मंच लगाओ राम सुभग, माइक लाओ राम सुभग, भीड़ जुटाओ राम सुभग, नाचो गाओ राम सुभग। आओ भाई राम सुभग, आओ भाई राम सुभग। उनका क्या भाषण देंगे, शब्दों के राशन देंगे। बहुत हुआ तो जनता को भरे पेट अनशन देंगे, प्यासे भूखे भारत को केवल जनगण मन देंगे। भीचो भीचो फिर खाली मुट्ठी, दर्द चबाओ राम सुभग, पीछे जाओ राम सुभग, मत खिसियाओ राम सुभग, देखो कितने नारे हैं उन्हें पचाओ राम सुभग। आओ भाई राम सुभग, वो सवार तुम मोटर हो, चौराहे का पोस्टर हो, वो हैं लाखों में तुम तो 2 कौड़ी के वोटर हो। उनकी है दुनिया सारी, तुम अपना ही कोटर हो। घड़ी घड़ी पर मीटिंग है, चाय बनाओ राम सुभग। घड़ी घड़ी पर मीटिंग है, चाय बनाओ राम सुभग, थाल सजाओ राम सुभग, गाल बजाओ राम सुभग, 56 भोग उन्हें सारा, तुम गम खाओ राम सुभग, 56 भोग उन्हें सारा, तुम गम खाओ राम सुभग। शोर भरे सन्नाटे हैं, तेज हवा के चाटे हैं, सूखी सूखी आंखें हैं, गीले गीले आटे हैं, और मंदिर मस्जिद के लफड़े अधिनायक ने बांटे हैं। वो जुलूस से लौटे हैं, पांव दबाओ राम सुभग। वो जुलूस से लौटे हैं, पांव दबाओ राम सुभग, हाथ मिलाओ राम सुभग, आंख चुराओ राम सुभग। अजब समय है खुद को ही सिर्फ डराओ राम सुभग, आओ भाई राम सुभग। तो ये जो आम आदमी है, आम आदमी का जो दर्द है, गीत के लिए गे होना वैसी ही शर्त है जैसी कि पहिए के लिए गोल होना। चौकोर पहिया नहीं चलेगा। और मैं अपने गीतों की धुन भी खुद बनाता हूँ। एक टुकड़ा सुनाता हूँ, समय है ना? वो अभी मैं याद कर रहा था। दबे पैरों से उजाला आ रहा है, दबे पैरों से उजाला आ रहा है, फिर कथाओं को खंगाला जा रहा है। दबे पैरों से उजाला आ रहा है, फिर कथाओं को खंगाला जा रहा है। वो कोरोना के दिन याद करिए। स्थगित है गति, समय का रथ रुका है। स्थगित है गति, समय का रथ रुका है। कह रहा मन बहुत नाटक हो चुका है। कह रहा मन बहुत नाटक हो चुका है। प्रश्न का उत्तर कठिन है इसलिए ही, प्रश्न का उत्तर कठिन है इसलिए ही। प्रश्न 100 बार टाला जा रहा है। दबे पैरों से उजाला आ रहा है, फिर कथाओं को खंगाला जा रहा है। मेरा एक गीत छपा था, मुझे प्रसंग याद आ रहा, क्योंकि महादेवी जी को बचपन से देखा। जब महादेवी जी के घर बारात लेके गए तो उन्होंने कहा कि मेरी कुर्सी उस गेट पे लगा दो चल के, जहाँ से दूल्हा आएगा। मैं जब आ रहा था तो उन्होंने सिर पे हाथ रखा, मुझे लगा जैसे एक पूरी की पूरी सदी का हाथ मेरे सिर पे है। तो कहने लगी, भाई मेरे पिता से उन्होंने कहा एक बार कि वो यश का गीत छपा है कादिमनी में, वो तो तुमसे अच्छा लिखता है। तो पिताजी बोले, दीदी ये पीढ़ियों का फर्क है, आपसे अच्छा हम लिखते हैं, हमसे अच्छा वो लिख रहा है। तो ऐसे विनोद भरे वातावरण में इलाहाबाद में जीना रहना हुआ। हम अगर कविता नहीं लिखते तो आश्चर्य होता।
बिल्कुल जी। गीत खुशियों के गुप्तचर, एक तो ये इतना मतलब रोचक रोमांचक शीर्षक है कि खुशियों को खोजने के लिए भी गुप्तचर भेजने पड़ते हैं। तो वो गुप्तचर होते कैसे होंगे? और इतनी बढ़िया बात है कि ये 2014 और 2017 की कविताएं हैं, इस बीच में ही तुमने लिखी हैं और ये बेस्ट सेलर भी रही।
हमने इनकी कविताओं की रील बनाई है।
अरे वाह। तो मैं जानना चाहूँगी कि एक तो ये इस शीर्षक के बारे में बताओ, और इन कविताओं में क्या कोई एक धागा है जो खुशियों के गुप्तचर शीर्षक को पूरा मुकम्मल करता है? और इसमें से हम कुछ कविताएं ज़रूर सुनना चाहेंगे ना आप लोग? गीत तुमसे ज़रूर
हमेशा ये कहा जाता था और एक अनुभव में भी रहता था कि कविताएं जो हैं वो दुख की बात करती हैं, उदासी की बात करती हैं, वगैरह वगैरह। मुझे लगा बहुत सारी चीज़ें हमें खुशियाँ देती हैं, लेकिन उनकी परिभाषा वैसी नहीं है जो आम तौर पर लोगों को खुशियाँ दे रही हों। वो ऐसी कौन सी चीज़ें हो सकती हैं जो खुशियाँ दें लोगों को, लेकिन वो आम खुशियों जैसी न दिखती हों। मैंने सड़क पर देखा कि एक औरत लंगड़ाते हुए चली आ रही थी। मैंने कहा मेरे मन में, या तो इसी जीवन में या किसी और जीवन में, किसी समांतर जीवन में ये मेरी माँ रही होगी, किसी और जन्म में इसने मुझे जन्म दिया होगा। मैं एक चिड़िया को देख रहा था, वो कलगी पर चोंच मार रही थी। मैंने सोचा ये भी मेरी कोई पुरानी रिश्तेदार रही होगी जिसने इस बार चिड़िया के रूप में जन्म लिया है, वगैरह। इस तरह की तमाम चीज़ें जो मुझे दिख रही थीं, जिन्हें हम आम तौर पर नज़रअंदाज करते हैं, लेकिन अगर हम उन्हें ध्यान से देखें तो वे हमारे लिए खुशियाँ खोज करके लाती हैं। हमें थोड़ा सा, भले 5 मिनट के लिए, भले 2 मिनट के लिए खुशी देती हैं। वे हमसे संबंधित नहीं होती हैं, वे हमारे परिसर से, हमारे समाज से भी संबंधित नहीं होती हैं, लेकिन वे हमें खुशी देती हैं। उन्हीं तत्वों की तलाश करते हुए, जैसे कहें कि ये सीक्रेट एजेंट हैं जो हमें प्रसन्नता प्रदान कर रही हैं, उन्हीं तत्वों की तलाश करते हुए एक कविता लिखी थी। उसमें कहीं खुशियों शब्द का जिक्र नहीं है, उस कविता में कहीं गुप्तचर शब्द का भी जिक्र नहीं है, लेकिन उस कविता में ऐसे ही चरित्रों का उल्लेख है जो अनजाने ही किसी एक सीक्रेट एजेंट की तरह हमारे जीवन में खुशियों को निवेश कर देती हैं, बिल्कुल छोटी छोटी। तो उन्हीं तत्वों को पकड़ने का प्रयास था। और कविता की बात ऐसी है कि जब यश जी रॉ में हों और कविता पढ़ रहे हों तो सारा समय यश जी को ही देना चाहिए, उन्हीं को सुनना चाहिए। मैं एक, कहते हैं जिसे, शगुन के तौर पर 1-2 लाइन में सुना देता हूँ, बाकी पूरा समय हम यश जी को ही सुनेंगे, जो भी समय हो गया, जो बचा है। ये है, 2 लाइनें हैं, खुशियों के गुप्तचर से ही हैं। जब मुश्किल समय आए, सब कुछ बेकाबू हो जाए। जब मुश्किल समय आए, सब कुछ बेकाबू हो जाए, उससे थोड़ा और प्रेम करना जिससे अब तक तुम करते आए, जिससे अब तक तुम करते आए।
आप लोगों ने महसूस किया होगा कि हमारे बीच में जो दोनों कवि हैं, दोनों के अंदर एक बच्चा बचा हुआ है। और मेरी गीत से बाहर लाउंज में बात हो रही थी कि लेखक होना कि आप में थोड़ी स्त्री हो, थोड़ा बच्चा हो, और थोड़ा सा कोई चिड़िया, जानवर, छोटे छोटे जो हमें खुशियाँ देते वो हो। तो गीत ने बहुत बड़ी बात बोली कि हम सब के अंदर एक सामूहिक तौर पे इन सब छोटी छोटी चीज़ों की चेतना रहती है। तो यश जी के यहाँ भी ऐसा ही है, बचपन लौट लौट के आता है। गीत की कविताओं में चिड़िया, दरख्त, छोटे छोटे कीड़े, छोटी छोटी चीज़ें बहुत सारी आती हैं जो हमें अपने आप से बहुत गहरे से जोड़ती है। इसीलिए ये दोनों बहुत ज़्यादा लोकप्रिय कवि हैं। और मुझे यश जी की एक कविता याद आ रही है, बहुत ही मुझे मज़ेदार, क्योंकि मैं अक्सर अपनी कामकाजी माँ को सुनती थी, सीएल नहीं है, सीएल ख़त्म हो गई, सीएल ख़त्म हो गई, इस कमबख्त को अभी बीमार पड़ना था, मेरी सीएल ख़त्म हो गई। तो यश जी अपनी एक कविता में लिखते हैं, एक ही सीएल बची है, चलो गॉसिप किया जाए। एक ही सीएल बची है, चलो गॉसिप किया जाए। एक ही सीएल बची है, चलो इसे खुद को दिया जाए। तो यश जी, आपके अंदर भी एक बच्चा है जो ऐसा लगता है कि मैंने बचपन में मोम रंग से कुछ फूल बनाए, बगीचे में बैठा उदास भंवरा मुझे, अच्छा ये सॉरी ये गीत की है। तो जब हम बच्चों की बात कर रहे थे बचपन की, तो ये गीत की कविता है जिसको मैं बताना चाहूँगी कि मैंने बचपन में मोम रंग से कुछ फूल बनाए, बगीचे में बैठा उदास भंवरा मुझसे उन फूलों का पता पूछता है। कि कैसे हमारे जीवन से फूल नष्ट हो रहे हैं और मधुमक्खियाँ नष्ट हो रही हैं, उसको इन छोटी सी 3 पंक्तियों में गीत ने इतने सुंदर तरीके से रचा है। तो यश जी और गीत में दोनों आपसे चाहूँगी छोटे छोटे जवाब कि बचपन की कौन सी वो स्मृतियाँ हैं जो आज भी हॉन्ट करती हैं और आज भी बार बार, मैं आप दोनों से चाहूँगी 3-3 लाइनों में इस पे जवाब दें। यश जी पहले आपसे, जो बार बार आपकी कविताओं में दस्तक देती हैं और आप बार बार नॉस्टैल्जिक होते हैं और चाहते हैं कि वो दुनिया वापस लौट आए।
मुझे बचपन की हरे फ्रॉक वाली लड़की बहुत याद आती है। हरे फ्रॉक वाली लड़की बहुत याद आती है, और उस लड़की को अब मैं अपनी पत्नी में देखता हूँ। मुझे लगता है कि वही लड़की मेरी पत्नी बन के साथ आ गई है। तो ये जो प्रकृति है हमारी, वो भी तो स्त्री का ही एक उदात्त रूप है ना। प्रकृति को हम समझ लें, स्त्री को समझ लें, बच्चों को समझ लें, तो हम सृष्टि को समझ लेंगे, और सृष्टि को समझ लेंगे तो कविता को समझ लेंगे। अभी दिसंबर बीता है, सीएल की बात कही मनीषा जी ने। अभी हमने त्रिमाया के कुछ अंश पढ़े। मैं रोमांचित हूँ सचमुच। स्त्री की जो एक ताकत है, एक जिजीविषा है, उसको रेखांकित जिस तरह इन्होंने किया है त्रिमाया में। तो मैं जो जीवन जो है ना, वो राग है और आग दोनों है, और राग और आग के समावेश से ही जिंदगी बनती है और कविता बनती है। देह भर में धूप मेहंदी सी रची है, आज घर पर ही रहेंगे। देह भर में धूप मेहंदी सी रची है, आज घर पर ही रहेंगे। है दिसंबर कैजुअल बाकी बची है, आज घर पर ही रहेंगे। है घना कोहरा की मौसम भी टची है, देह भर में धूप मेहंदी सी रची है, आज घर पर ही रहेंगे।
क्या बात है, शुक्रिया यश जी। गीत, अपने बचपन का कौन सा वो नॉस्टैल्जिया है जो आज भी तुम्हारी कविताओं को नॉक करता है और बार बार लौट लौट के आता है?
वो एक अदृश्य सी, अमूर्त सी चीज़ है वो, और मुझे लगता है कि मैं एक मरी हुई पेंसिल से लिखता हूँ। एक छोटा सा किस्सा है कि जब मैं छोटा था और जब लिखने की शुरुआत की थी, तो घर में मुझे सबसे ज़्यादा समर्थन मेरी बड़ी बहन ने दिया था। मेरी बड़ी बहन मुझसे 7-8 साल बड़ी थी उम्र में। मैं 13 का था, वो 20 की थी। 14 का हुआ, मेरी चीज़ें यहाँ वहाँ छपनी शुरू हो गई, बच्चों की चीज़ें, बच्चों की रचनाएं। मेरी बड़ी बहन बहुत बीमार रहा करती थी। हमने कभी, मुझे स्मृति में नहीं है कि मैंने कभी उन्हें स्वस्थ देखा हो। तो जब वो 22 की हुई, और उसी समय मुंबई में दंगे शुरू हो गए, 1992-93 के दंगे। उनका स्वास्थ्य बहुत बिगड़ा, और मेरे पिताजी ने बहुत प्रयास किया, बहुत कोशिश की कि एक एम्बुलेंस बुला ली जाए, जुटा ली जाए, अस्पताल ले जाया जाए इन्हें। लेकिन इतने दंगे चल रहे थे, इतनी आगजनी मची हुई थी कि एम्बुलेंस का इंतज़ाम नहीं हो पाया। और रात को 11:30 बजे हमारी आंखों के सामने मेरी बड़ी बहन ने दम तोड़ दिया। वो बहुत पसंद करती थी इस बात को कि मैं लिखता हूँ, क्योंकि वो बहुत पढ़ती थी। मज़े की बात है कि मृत्यु से 2 दिन पहले उन्होंने मुझे एक पेंसिल दी थी और कहा था कि तुम अपनी कविताएं, अपनी चीज़ें इसी पेंसिल से लिखना। मुझे नहीं पता था कि 2 दिन बाद वो नहीं रहेंगी। फिर जब मैं उनके मृत्यु के शोक से उबरा 6 महीने बाद, तब मैंने उस
कि 2 सवाल हम दर्शकों में से लें, तो बहुत प्रिसाइज और छोटे सवाल दोनों लेखकों से। जी बोलिए।
आपने जैसे बोला था कि कभी कभी दूसरों को देख के हम खुश हो जाते हैं, भले ही हम उनसे संबंध नहीं होती, तो क्या ये कहीं ना कहीं हमारी अच्छाई है कि हम उनके खुशियों में खुश हो जाते हैं, या फिर ये सामने वाले की मासूमियत है जो कि हम उनसे कनेक्ट कर जाते हैं? वो क्या चीज़ है?
मैं बताऊं? हमारा जो पूरा व्यक्तित्व है, हम एक संगीत के वाद्य वृंद की तरह होते हैं, हम एक साज की तरह होते हैं। हमें नहीं पता होता है कि कौन सा व्यक्ति, कौन सी वस्तु, कौन सी चीज़ हमें छू करके चली जाए और हमारे भीतर से संगीत निकलने लगे। तो हम दूसरे लोगों द्वारा बजाए जा रहे होते हैं। संगीत हमारे भीतर होता है, वो हमारे भीतर निविष्ट कर रहे होते हैं, भले हमारे साथ उनका संबंध हो या ना हो। वीरेंद्र डंगवाल हिंदी के बहुत बड़े कवि थे। वो उनकी एक कविता है माथुर साहब को नमस्कार। वो एक आदमी साइकिल से जा रहा होता है, वो कहता है नमस्कार किसी और को, लेकिन उसके कहने का जो ढंग था उससे कवि को अपने एक पुराने शिक्षक माथुर साहब की याद आ जाती है। तो उस कवि ने, उस साइकिल वाले ने कवि के भीतर जो वाद्य यंत्र था उसको नमस्कार कह के छेड़ दिया, छू दिया, यादें जाग गई एक्सीडेंटली ही। तो हमें नहीं पता होता कि कौन हमें कैसे। हाँ, ये एक कहते भी हैं कि एक मलारमे नाम के कवि थे फ्रांस के बहुत बड़े, वो कहते भी हैं, कह के गए कि कविता एक भावनात्मक दुर्घटना है। आपको नहीं पता होता कब आपके साथ घटित हो जाएगी, किस रूप में आ जाएगी। क्या बात।
आप लोगों को सुन के तो बहुत अच्छा लगा। मैं यहाँ पे गीत जी हैं, यश जी हैं, मनीषा जी हैं, मतलब GYM, तो शब्दों के जिम में आ गए हैं हम। और तो मैं बस यही, मैं लिखता तो हूँ लेकिन अभी तक प्रकाशित नहीं कर पाया हूँ अपनी कविताओं को। तो मैं ये जानना चाहता हूँ कविता को कविता होने के लिए क्या महत्वपूर्ण है? शब्द, भाव या विधा या शिल्प, क्या महत्वपूर्ण है?
कविता को कविता बनाती है आपकी अंतश्चेतना, और आप सुबह से शाम तक जीवन जी नहीं रहे होते, कविता ही जी रहे होते हैं। सुबह उठने के साथ मैं तो टहलने जाता हूँ ना, मुझे लगता है कि सुबह हो रही है और हम कोशिश करते हैं कि पैदल चलें। पैदल चलने में दृश्यों की अनदेखी नहीं होती, हम एक फूल का चटकना भी सुन सकते हैं। हर आदमी के भीतर कवि होता है, हर आदमी के भीतर एक वसंत होता है, हर आदमी के भीतर सावन होता है, और कवि तो होता ही है। तो मुझे लगता है कि वो जो चीज़ कविता बनाती है वो आपकी अंतश्चेतना है, आपका मन है, और मन का फूल जैसा खिलना है। जब कोई फूल खिलता है तो वो कविता ही तो है, जीवन ये कविता ही तो है। और इस कविता को हम कैसे रूप देते हैं, शब्द महत्वपूर्ण नहीं होते, भाव महत्वपूर्ण होते हैं। भाव शब्दों को लेके आते हैं, शब्द भाव लेके नहीं आते। तो हमें लगता है कि जैसे स्मृतियां हैं, पेड़ बरस रहे हैं जबकि बादल दूर निकल चुका है बरसकर। जैसे किसी आत्मीय के बरसों पहले बिछड़ जाने के बाद भी बरसती रहती है आंखें, पेड़ अब भी बरस रहे हैं। भरी हुई आंखों से भरी बड़ी कोई कविता है क्या? खिले हुए होठों से बढ़ के कोई कविता है क्या? मुझे लगता है कि सूरज के माथे पे भी शिकन पड़ती है, लेकिन कविता बेशिकन रहती है। कविता जिंदगी का हौसला देती है। सबसे बड़ी कविता मुझे लगती है इनकलाब जिंदाबाद।
क्या बात है।
सबसे छोटी कविता है और सबसे बड़ी कविता है। 3 पहिए वाली साइकिल बरामदे के एक कोने में चुपचाप खड़ी है। आंगन भूल गया है खुद का आंगन होना। बेरोक टोक आती जाती है मुडेर पर बिल्ली। कोई जिद नहीं खींच लाती मुझे चबूतरे तक। सुबह होती है नहीं खिलते तितले शब्दों के फूल। रात आती है नहीं आते तितली के पंख जैसे सपने। कोई जिद नहीं खींच लाती मुझे चबूतरे तक। इन दिनों फूल सपने जिद आंगन सब कुछ नानी के घर है।
क्या बात है। कविता बेशिकन होती है, इस बात के साथ हम इस सत्र को ख़त्म करेंगे। और बहुत अच्छी बात है ये कि इस सत्र से मैं बहुत कुछ लेके जा रही हूँ। मैं एकदम खाली आई थी और मैं क्लूलेस थी, लेकिन अब मैं कविताओं से और भावों से भरी हुई हूँ। और मैं आप सबका धन्यवाद करती हूँ कि आपने एकाग्रता के साथ ये सत्र सुना। गीत तुम्हारा धन्यवाद, यश जी आपका धन्यवाद। और ये सत्र हम सब इसको YouTube पे देख पाएंगे और बहुत सारे सुनने वाले लोग इससे लाभान्वित होंगे कि कविता दरअसल क्या है। धन्यवाद।
कवि के मन के दर्द तो शब्द में छुप जाए, दुनिया जो ना समझ सके वो कविता ही समझ जाए। तो कविता के ऊपर अगर हम बात करने जाए तो इसके ऊपर हम पूरी ज़िंदगी बात करें तो भी कम पड़ जाएंगे। और ये पैनल बहुत ही खूबसूरत था। थैंक यू ऑल ऑफ यू फॉर जॉइनिंग अस। अब मैं यश मालविया जी को आमंत्रित करना चाहूँगा कि वह हमारे दोनों मनीषा जी और गीत जी को सम्मानित करें, क्योंकि यश मालविया जी हमारे बीच में से सबसे अधिक अनुभवी है। प्लीज़ सर। एक बार जोरदार तालियां हो जाएं हमारे पूरे पैनल के लिए। सर प्लीज़ दिस साइड। धन्यवाद। कविता के बारे में हमको बहुत कुछ जानने मिला। आपको उसके लिए बहुत सारा धन्यवाद। थैंक यू। वी विल बी स्टार्टिंग इन सम टाइम।
अपूर्व शुक्रिया भाई। आप लोगों का तो क्या बात।
अरे हम तो आपको सुनते चले
आपको सुन के जो सुख मिलता है।
A very warm afternoon to all the ladies and gentlemen present over here. Welcome to our session titled Glass Bottom. Today, we're invited to look beneath the surface to explore the depths of truth, transparency, and the fragile layers of the human experience that often remain hidden from the view. To guide us through this exploration, please welcome Ma'am Sonali Prasad. Sonali Prasad is an award-winning journalist and writer whose work sits at the intersection of science, environment, and storytelling. A former Knight Wallace Fellow and TED Fellow, her reporting from the front lines of our changing planet offers a unique crystalline perspective on the world we inhabit. And our moderator is Ma'am Pallavi Reva Pragada, is a journalist who predominantly covers politics and policy. She started her career as an international correspondent with the India Today group and reporting on culture and business from Europe, Middle East, and Far East. Her last stint was with the First Post, where she wrote political analysis and reported on social and political crises. So, ma'am, this session is of 45 minutes. The stage is yours. Thank you. We can wrap it up.
So thank you so much for that introduction. Welcome to Odisha, Sonali. I welcome you to Odisha because I consider myself a daughter of Odisha, having worked on political literature over here and political writing over here for a very long time. And we really look forward to getting a glimpse into your life, into your world. So Sonali has written a wonderful, wonderful book called Glass Bottom, where she has humanized the climate experience. Now, both of us have grown up in a city called Delhi, which is right now reeling under severe pollution crisis. And as we experience climate change very personally in our relationships, in where we choose to pursue a career, where we choose to live, seeing aging parents, seeing us grow up, seeing children. There are so many emotions tied to climate change. It's a lived experience. It's no longer this theoretical analysis where we look at, oh, the glaciers are melting, or there's something that's far away, that's something that's not part of our everyday. It becomes a very real experience, a very human experience with actual emotions attached to it. I want to understand from you, when you fictionalized it, when you put human stories into the climate change space, what did you go through and what triggered you really to write this book?
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Fun fact, my younger sister's name is Pallavi, so I feel right at home. The person who's helping me is also named Pallav, so I'm like, what is happening? She's everywhere. Those of you who are joining the session can actually come forward so that we can have a much more intimate discussion. It's just better because it's a smaller crowd. For me, Glass Bottom happened after nearly a decade's worth of journalism and reporting. I've been covering science and climate issues for the longest time. It's just been my natural inclination. I remember when we used to have generic modules in my J school, which is where I was doing my master's degree. I would just pick up that subject of oil or air without any prompt from the instructor. So this is something that I've just been it's very close to my heart, this subject. And then I personally also have a history of respiratory inflammation, so I feel bad air very viscerally in my body. And the female body is a mirror to the rupture outside, and that's why the book is called Glass Bottom. Because when I was thinking about what to title the book, we went through 13 title variations. My editor was fed up at the end. And this came to me in a dream, Glass Bottom. Very simple title. It has its own complications because when we first put the book up on Amazon, every time you type Glass Bottom, Bartan used to come up, like utensils. And so, when somebody asks me in a bookstore, where do you want your book to be kept, poetry, drama? I say, as long as it's not the cutlery section, I'm good. Because that's all my mother used to get, when she used to be searching for reviews. Yeah. But Glass Bottom is basically a boat that you see in the Andamans or somewhere where you can see the reef. You sit there to experience the reef and the sea life on the coast. So the outside doubles up inside because of the surface, the very fragile surface of glass. And I wanted to look at the mirror image. So when a rupture, when something becomes too big, too overwhelming, where you can't put your finger on it, which is climate, how do you talk about it? How do you experience it? And one way you can do that is to use the mirror image. And I use the female body as the mirror image. You're talking about erosion, the female body goes through erosion. You're talking about extraction, the female body goes through extraction. You have childbirth, that has its own inherent violence, right? To get a new life into this world. There's regeneration that also happens in the female body. So I use the female body as a means, as a vessel to explore the mirror image. And that's why I wrote Glass Bottom, that revolves around the mother-daughter pairs, which are two of them. And why I chose fiction when I already have a journalism background. So see, when you're doing something like fiction on a subject such as climate rupture, having the journalism background gives you a sort of ethical solace in a way, because you are working with a responsibility of sorts. You don't want to create that mammoth storyline just to sell it without it having an iota of truth, because you're dealing with someone's life, right? And so when I base my fictional narratives on testimony that I've accumulated over the years, going to these coastlines where the houses of fishermen are just like you see the raised houses just standing there as ruins. It's a very visceral memory in my head. Like I can almost bring it back, the emotions that I went through, because you have to bottle it up when you're a journalist. You have to be very, you just have to be very stoic, but it affects you. And I think fiction lets me process all those complicated emotions that I felt when I was doing that. So for me, it's just a wider canvas. Non-fiction lets me deal with testimony. There's a different kind of responsibility. And with fiction, I can infuse my internal feelings and match it with, the experiences of these characters that are the women that I, encountered during my reporting days. Yeah.
Wow, that's a wonderful summary of what you've done here. Now, when we take an eco-feminist lens to a problem like climate change, we are actually bringing together two big issues. One is more of a socio-cultural issue where, woman's body is analyzed through society's lens also. And the fact that we don't often celebrate how regenerative it is, how, like you said, there's tremendous violence also that it goes through creating another human being, and the kind of, the kind of pain and the kind of resilience it requires, the childbirth requires, is something which is completely, is not talked about as much. In this era of Instagram, there are a lot of people who are raising a lot of these kind of questions. There are young mothers coming out and saying we need a certain, postpartum is being discussed a lot. Having when I had my baby, it was there's a group that we had created called Pandemons, which was a pandemic mothers group talking primarily about postpartum, about depression, about you're dealing with a different kind of a body. No, those are that's a complicated science and a
a hill. And now all those homes are abandoned and they just lie there as ghosts. Because everybody had to come down. That's their livelihood. They will come down to the sea. So how do you create recovery without involving women, without involving the local community? They hold the social currency of the community. So you have to involve women even from an economic standpoint.
Yeah. That was actually my next question to you. That, you talked about how they were rehabilitated on top of a hill. Now, since you have a journalistic experience and you've seen a lot of ground reality, and that is what triggered you to produce a work like this, the attachment to the subject and being compelled to write on something like this, I want to understand from you, what is your take on public policy around life of people who are living on these coasts, and how do you think it can be sensitized a lot more to the realities of their everyday, to the realities of their trade, to these different gender roles within these communities? How do we need to sensitize our policymakers towards this? Because because a subject like climate is premised on the change that we can bring to the climate and how much damage we can stop and how preventive we can be and how proactive we can be. So I want to understand from you if there are about 3 or 4 pointers that you can give to policymakers, because I want this to make headlines. I mean, there's a lot of work being done on the coastal areas, and a lot of thanks to the impact sector now, a lot of philanthropies and a lot of funds and a lot of cross-sector associations are built around problems like these. But I'd still want to get your perspective on this.
I think the first step is what you've done, right? We need to have these conversations across disciplines. When Glass Bottom came out, the traditional route is you go to the bookstores to talk about your book. But I didn't want that. This book is something that merits discourse among different people. It's not a linearly written book. There are pieces that are prose, there's poetry.
And India does have a huge coastline, so we're talking about a lot of people here. And a lot of different communities and across cultures.
Yeah, it is.
From east
And
to
so
west.
we, in our political and public discourse, is the Jawan and the Kisan, right? So there's one section in the book where I try to place the fisherman between the Jawan and the Kisan, and where he is centered in
calling the fisherman in Hindi.
In Machwara, right? But so there is a part in the book where they're in the cyclone shelter and the fisherman is, kind of reflecting on his, there's a storm passing by and he's reflecting on his circumstance, and he says from the farmer up above and the soldier down below, the fisherman kind of finds himself in the middle, because we're talking about the farmer's suicide, who's been liberated in a way because of their predicament. So I'm trying to locate the front lines, the communities that are the seafront, basically, the coastline. And we don't talk about the fishermen. We don't talk about their involvement in our political revolutions. We don't talk about whenever there is a plant coming up or there's a nuclear, project. They are the ones marching and talking about the pollution to our waterways. That is one aspect. So coming back to how do you inform public policy in a wider way, keeping a wider audience in mind, is first have this discourse. I went to law school to talk about Glass Bottom, right? I was very adamant, and I did it myself instead of waiting for someone to mediate it. We went to English schools, but we are talking to everybody. There was a doctor who moderated a session of mine. So she talked about fertility and like the female body. So talk to different people, because then you'll realize that when there is a lawsuit, women are mostly labeled as collateral in these cases. Yeah. They're not even labeled as victims. Yeah. So how do you address any public policy without actually getting them to the forefront and talking about their problems? Simple issue. If there is a flood and you are going there to do rehabilitation work, you need to know that during the floods, the toilets are not working, right? Everything's gone. What happens to a girl who's having a period? What do? They use the same cloth, they dip it in that flood water and they use it back again, causing all kinds of issues. This is considered a minor issue. This is not a major issue.
That's from a recent research?
This was again one of the stories that we found out.
A recent story?
Yeah, it was a recent story. In fact, one of my characters, Luni, she's a beautician. And when they are put into the cyclone shelter, she doesn't know what to do with herself, right? She starts threading other women's eyebrows. That's the thing she does when there is a cyclone outside. What do you do? Your life carries on. And while she's making eyebrows of the other women, she's having a period. She can't use the bathroom because it's completely clogged. It's very simple. Nothing big happens in this book, okay? Because I think we've had that mammoth storyline of the tsunami wave going over Everest, a monk, ringing a bell and saying, oh, we're gonna die. It's not gonna take one giant catastrophe to wipe us all out. We are doing small nested disasters.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's the thought that occurred to me as well, because when we analyze the tsunami, it's like one event. And then, it becomes this, the history, the way we perceive it in public memory, that, okay, that one tsunami happened and caused this much devastation. But what about the daily, bits of devastation that are taking place because of problems that we're refusing to forget, solve, but even acknowledge? So, the reality of breaking down, I think you've done a huge service to not just the Machwaras, but you've done a huge service to Indian society by talking about problems and by making these problems mainstream. At least you're attempting to make it mainstream by crossing these, boundaries of genre, boundaries of, these different platforms that you're doing. But what we're actually doing is that you're talking about problems that we are not able to accept as problems in our mainstream. Like the media is never going to talk about it. There'll never be like a prime time debate on this. Does that hurt you? Does the the way the mainstream media looks at, or perhaps ignores a lot of these kind of discussions which can lead to better public policy? Does that affect you?
Of course it does affect me as a journalist, right? That's why we do what we do. We're trying to move the needle in some way or the other. But it also it propels me to do that work in fiction. I think it's a very, Emily Dickinson says, tell the truth but tell it slant. And fiction lets me do that. For anybody who is a reader here, I also think about the way climate fiction is now shaping. Yeah. We have had a lot of strong women shaping it globally. But what is the Indian vision when you deal with an ecological genre? I did not write it specifically for this genre, but now in retrospect I can talk about it. Ursula Le Guin writes science fiction. She has a theory, the carrier bag theory of science fiction, right? When you think about the first weapon, the first tool that was invented for mankind, what do you think of? Anybody has an answer in the audience? The first tool. What? Sorry? First tool. What was the first tool that was invented? Stone? What else? Bones, right? You generally go to stone and bones, which were used for hunting, right? It's the hunter's toolkit. That's the first toolkit. But what about the bag? So it's the bag that was the first vessel that the women invented to carry the flowers and the seeds and the fruits, because they were gatherers, right? So she says there's one way to do a story, like an arrow. It's a linear perspective. It goes from one starting point to a beginning point and you shoot. But then there's the other way of doing a story, which is a vessel. It's a bag. It's the womb. It's the ultimate vessel of storytelling. And so that is my effort to, be a part of that lineage, to tell you that there's no one way of doing a story. Yes, you can have that giant mountain and the wave going over it, and it'll be a blockbuster in your cinemas. But then you have a modest offering like Glass Bottom, not perfect at all, but it shows you the regular chipping away, which we all as women in this room go through monthly. We know what that means, to grow back again, to repair again, to build again, to break again. And that is what our lives will be in this world, in this era of rupture. And I think my hope is that the West also meets us here. Like, first of all, India needs to recognize this ambition of doing its own kind of storytelling when it comes to ecology and environment crisis, and then the West recognizes it. Because when I was there, they used to have something called climate grief support groups, right? Like, if you're worried about climate, come, let's talk together. And it's a great initiative, because a lot of young people are getting affected mentally by this. If you're living in Delhi with that obnoxious smog, it's going to affect you. But when I went there, all the concerns were about Manhattan flooding and the ski resorts losing, Manhattan flooding in 2050, and ski resorts losing snow. And great, that's a worry. But we are going through it now. During COVID, the cyclone shelters were being used as quarantine centers. And then the cyclone hits. what do you do then? There are people already quarantining then, so where do you put them? How do you allocate space for evacuees? It's such a nested problem that only a country like India, Bangladesh, who are going through it, they will have the answers. They can tell the other parts of the world how do you deal with nested ruptures. So I think these are some of the big questions I had in my head. while writing this
Absolutely. You know, one of the issues with a country like ours is that the problems are infinite and we other a problem very quickly. And if it doesn't affect us directly, if it doesn't affect us every day, then we're not bothered. Even something like pollution, I mean, it's so sad that sometimes it's just ridiculed and people say things like, okay, we'll just live in Delhi, even if we have to live 10 years lesser, we can't go anywhere else. But that's how normalized, normalizing of this kind of a crisis takes place. And maybe the West is, you're perhaps far more sensitive to concerns like this. And India will eventually get there. I think when that sensitivity comes, then the sensitivity will also reflect in our policy making. It will also reflect in the way we collectively understand a problem and perceive a problem like pollution. Now I'd like to throw the floor open for any questions that you have for her. Anybody, any of you Gen Z people, if you have a question, we'd love to take one. We don't have much time, we just have time for 2 questions, but we can wrap it up after that. Can you hand the mic over to sir? We actually wanted to engage the audience a lot more, but we are constricted by time.
This climatic change, what will happen after 10 years or 20 years, that the temperature is increasing. By that, what way will suffer, or this society will suffer?
That's a broad question.
It's a very broad question, and I think it's very region specific, sir. But there are enough predictions out there as to what is going to happen. We are seeing the unraveling very closely. You see it in the mountains when during the rainfalls, the flooding happens, the landslides. Darjeeling had massive landslides last year. Yeah. We see it with excessive heat, which I think will be the next big problem in our city, Delhi. It is one of the most insidious climate issues because you don't necessarily see anything, right? It's just heat. But what it does to the body is extremely, like, it's venomous. The body shuts down. There is no cooling system that can prevail after a temperature. Yeah, and then you wonder what happens. And the big question I have for you all today is when you're dealing with these measures, you're dealing with heat, what section of society do you cater to? So when I was outside, I read a report about heat in prisons. And the big question is, who's thinking about prisoners when it comes to excessive heat? They're already the damned. They deserve no redemption. They are paying for their crimes. They can rot in hell, literal hell, because of the heat. So we will not design any cooling measures for them. But we have to. We have to do it for the old age homes. We have to do it for the homeless. We have to do it for the prisoners because that is what being human is. That's where our morality is. We do not leave anyone to die.
It is due to deforestation. How that can be checked, that should be taken up.
Yes, absolutely. Multiple regions, multiple reasons why certain things are happening. But what Shonali has really done here is, unlike a macro perspective to something as large as climate change and something as, some glaciers far away and some sea that are melting, you've actually made it very micro, very neighborhood, very like it can happen to us. It's happening to people. It's happening to real people. And unless we tell a story like that and we explain a problem like that, it's very little chance that we'll understand it and accept it as our own problem. So what we're facing today is that we are not invested in climate change personally. Yeah. And that is a problem. The moment we were invested in COVID personally because we could die. So COVID was not like, oh, COVID is happening somewhere far away, thousands of miles away. So this is a very, the problem becomes very real, very neighborhood. So is there any other question that yes, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So ma'am, my question is, do you think the idea of neutrality in journalism has historically worked against women and their lived truths?
The neutrality?
Okay. Has worked against women and?
Their lived truths. Their experiences.
Yeah, I think neutrality is a very Western concept, the idea of being objective, because if you're writing a story, you're taking a particular angle. Yeah. So there's nothing like objectivity. I always talk about this, the idea of a moral code or ethical neutrality, they are they're passed on to you as, you know, these textbooks you're supposed to read when you become a journalist. But then you go to the front line and you develop your own ethical and moral code. You realize that you're taking an angle. No, if I'm writing a story about you, I can write about your college years, I can write about your parents, I can write about any particular part of your life that I want to write about. That's me taking a stance. So there is nothing like objectivity in journalism. You need to take an angle and be able to justify it responsibly. Testimony is what your holy grail is as a journalist. आप किसी के lived experience को किसी उनका time, उनका space, उनका place लेके you're building a story. You have responsibility for that. And that's what journalism is. So yes, women have been neglected because they are not the first people want to talk to. They're not considered the serious witnesses of a rupture. But then we are on the other side now, no? We are female journalists. So we understand. We will go to Mataji and ask, what happened after the flood? You know, you couldn't take your pregnant daughter-in-law, and where did she give birth when it was flooding? It's very normal question. No, there's a baby after the flood's gone by, where did the baby happen? So it's us on the other side of the fence, and we have to do the good job now. So always remember, when someone talks to you about objectivity, subjectivity, morality, what to do and what not to do, develop your own code, because codes always serve the people making the code, right? Build your own code. That's why you will do good work. That's the way you will do good work as a storyteller, as a journalist. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
I think another, another thing that's required, and this is a gap that people like you are filling, is writing about women is very important. And women need to write about women if men are not writing about women, because their stories need to. I wrote a book on Nandini Satpathy. She was a chief minister of a state where, our generation doesn't even know about Nandini Satpathy. I had to pull that book out of a dying, generation's memory. And there was literally nothing. When I Googled her, there was just one, I mentioned it in the session before this, there was just one obituary by Khushwant Singh where he'd written not so kind things about her, calling her out on some one more drink that she'd asked for. And this is, by the way, Khushwant Singh, who's written books on Scotch. So it's terrible. Chief Minister of a state, a really cool chief minister, you have a woman icon right there. She crossed the border to fight the 1971 war. She's going to Vogue she's going to Paris to get featured in Vogue. Do we know her? Do we know the land reforms she brought? Do we know the dowry prohibition that she brought in place? A tremendous policy maker. Story is not known because story is not written, because women's stories and the perspective that today we have as women, the platforms that we have, women have never had that. Nobody's written about how, for instance, even vendetta against a woman politician's character. Today we talk about it in the era of Instagram, and where, where writers can have a certain space to express. But for so many years, it's only been men writing about men. Or men writing about how great they are, or men writing about how the world is created by men. So it is a lot of filling that gap, that you're telling the story of a beautician who is living on the coastline and is going through so much and is on her period. Forget about anything else. Writing about periods was not kosher. Till 10 years ago, those wrapped, those sanitary pads wrapped in newspapers, and they're giving it to you like you're smuggling gold or something.
I think it still happens.
It still happens, but it's at least conversations around menstruation, and the one thing we can give the present government credit for is when they started this whole Padman and this entire even the Stree Swabhiman scheme where women were creating their own sanitary napkins. It's like at least it's a reality that we are acknowledging.
Yeah. Next time you go to the shop, the bhaiya, and get pads, and he wraps it really nicely, like papers, and he gives it. One time it happened to me, and I said, "Merry Christmas, bhaiya, par abhi kyun de rahe ho gift?"
That's wonderful.
He's like why? I'm like, why are you decorating it with a ribbon? And don't do that. It's just a pad, and it's wonderful, but it's so shameful at the same time. I asked a male colleague of mine to help me at one point. And he did not know what the wings are for. So he's like, what do you mean by wings and no wings? And I'm like, oh, you have to figure it out yourself. Don't you have a mom? Like, you ask people.
There was a very interesting stand-up comic, this girl who had just cracked this joke. It was really funny. She said a telescope was invented before the sanitary napkin. So she said, this guy was looking at the moon while his wife or mother were like languishing here without a sanitary napkin. So it's crazy, like how how less weightage this particular aspect is given, and the realities of how Nandini Satpathy having children woman going through everything else, as was Indira Gandhi, while, you know, being at the helm of administration and governance in the nation. And she was actually she had warned Indira Gandhi against the emergency just a couple of hours before the emergency was proclaimed. So this is, and people in Odisha don't know about her. So this is again, I feel, a challenge of archiving stories of women, and a huge gap that you've tried to fill. Is there any other audience question from the audience that we can take? Come on, you guys. I'm sure climate change is bothering all of you. This is the last question.
Do you have a question? It's written on your face. What's your question? Does anybody have a mic? Excuse me. Hi. Can you give her the mic? One last question. Yeah.
Because unless we get the youth involved in climate and all the cool things we're discussing.
This is not related to your book. Like, this is a very general question related to your career as a journalist.
Yeah.
Did you face any backlash while trying to speak up as a woman, for women, or anything in that context?
That's part and parcel of our job.
Of course.
I remember, like, the first time I did a gig as an investigative reporter in the United States, and we were talking about the Obama administration's investment on, like, the Exim Bank's investment in dirty fossil fuel plants. And while I was doing that, I got this really nice hate mail. It was a certificate that says, you know, welcome to the Bad Reporters Club. This is to certify that Sonali Press. And I was like, wow. And I've actually got it framed and I have it. So it's part and parcel of your work. Of course, it can cross boundaries. It can affect your life. It can affect what you do. But we write because there's something compelling in us. It is not a financially lucrative job, either to be a fictional writer or to do journalism. There's something else that should push you to do this. And when that is the case, I don't think there's any stopping you. If you stick to that, you know, wo jo mashal jalti hai na jab andar mein, to then you will do it, even if there are 10,000 obstacles in your way. Because there's no other incentive to do this job. And to write a book like Glass Bottom, definitely there was no other incentive, because it's an extremely, in a good way, a very weird book, and I'm very proud of it. It doesn't succeed in all places. It fails gloriously, but it tries to stay truthful. It tries to stay courageous, because I'm not a courageous person in my real life, but this book is where I wanted to be courageous and wanted to be honest.
Oh, lovely, fantastic. To sum it up, you asked a wonderful question on neutrality. I think today we've established that neutrality is something that is designed by someone to just make you not take a stand. And I think what your book tells us is that it is fashionable and it is cool to take a stand, and we must take a stand for what we really believe in and for what the world should become. So thank you so much for attending this wonderful session. Thank you, KLF,
everybody,
for bringing us on one platform.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I want to say you something. When I knew about you, that I will be hosting you, I read some of your pages, ma'am. They were just excellent. I liked the mundane life that you depicted in your book. It's like far from those sci-fi fictionals and all. This is like a thing that sobs us, and it's calm. So it's very good. Thank you for the great session. I would like to request Priya ma'am to felicitate our speakers. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insights.
Good afternoon, everyone. The session of empowerment. The feminism future, redefining power, policy, and purpose. Insightful yet transformative role of feminine perspectives in building balanced and purposeful leadership. This season brings together a distinguished panel of women writers and thinkers whose work reimagines leadership, ethics, and cultural narratives through feminine perspectives. Anuja Chandramouli, a best-selling mythological author and new age Indian classicist, explores power and purpose through epic retellings. Priya Arora adds philosophical depth by bridging ancient Vedantic wisdom with modern ethical leadership through lived experiences. This discussion will be moderated by Mr. Saikat Majumdar, whose engagement with literature, culture, contemporary discourse brings together both depth and balance to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is going to have a really intimate feel, and I hope will involve everybody in the conversation. It's both kind of scary and a kind of an honor to moderate a session about women's writing. As a writer who has kept returning to issues of gender and sexuality, it is really wonderful to do this, but as it happens, today morning, Kalinga Lit Fest gave me one of their plaques where my pronoun has been assigned to her. So I didn't say anything about it. I'm not much of a stickler for pronouns, but it's interesting that it thanks Saikat Majumdar for her participation in the Literature Festival. I just pointed that to Jatin Nayak. He was like very amused by it. So clearly I'm used to, often when editors from another culture edit your name, they don't know, and I've been assigned this gender before. So that is, with that kind of dubious honor, I kind of come here today. And I have a lot of questions to ask. We have two of our speakers, they are not here, so we'll have more time to sort of pester the speakers who are here, Anuja and Priya. So I wanted to start with a question which I'm sure both of you have faced many times, and yet I think people don't tire of hearing of it. And at its most basic form, it's the question, do you want to be known as a writer or a woman writer? And it's a difficult question for anybody who kind of identifies with any social group that has been historically marginalized. A writer or a black writer, white writers don't hear it. But in this case, I think this has an added importance, because the question is there really something called a feminine worldview? Is there something unique and distinctive about a feminine worldview? Or do women writers take general spaces, especially public spaces, which have been very male, very masculinized? Today's public spaces are very violent, and transform them. And I think in this matter, one of the exemplary texts which I often use in my class is Virginia Woolf's 3 Guineas. And that text is about how two subjects, education and war, especially war, how to stop war. And it's uncanny that when you sort of think about that today, it's like, oh, a man is asking a woman how to stop war. And it's this amazing plea that we got it all wrong. Our public space, our professions, everything has become too violent, too kind of performative. Let's reimagine this in the image of a more private feminine sensibility. So, I mean, my question to you is there something called the feminine sensibility that you feel is unique, that you feel informs your works, or maybe the work of other writers that you admire? So maybe I'll start with you, Anuja.
Thank you, Saikat. And see, when I don't think any of us wants to be known as a woman writer or anything, because no one's going to say male writer.
So, you know, a writer is just writer. It doesn't matter whether you stand up or sit down to piss. So I feel it's kind of annoying when that comes up. But that said, there definitely is a feminist perspective that needs to be discussed, that needs to be written about. And people may say, why? Why in 2025? The feminists have ruined everything anyway. They've ruined the traditional family with their feminazi ways. So unfortunately, it is necessary to claim that space at the table. Because traditionally, when you take mythology, it has strictly been interpreted and controlled by the patriarchy, by one section of patriarchy at that, you know. So the narrative has been controlled. We've been told, you know, for generations, we've been told that women ought to behave in a certain way. Male desire is always legitimatized, even if it's taken to its extreme, whereas feminine desire is always stigmatized, villainized, punished. So we need to reclaim this narrative, and women's stories need to be told by women. So I feel it is important to write from a feminist perspective when it comes to history and mythology. And you talked about what a violent space we inhabit today, and I couldn't help thinking of Dhurandhar. It's on everybody's mind now, and see, there's a lot to, let's be fair, there's a lot to like about that movie, you know. How cute was Akshay Khanna? And see, I was a fan when he was singing I Am a Bachelor. So, you know, while he is a very problematic, toxic character, you really admire that performance. It has mass appeal, but we also need to talk about the fact that in that man's world, you have a teeny tiny girl who looks about 15. And somehow people don't seem to think it's problematic to pair up Ranveer Singh with this teenager. She really looks like, it was embarrassing and painful for me to watch that. I understand the script is saying that she's a very young girl who can be easily manipulated in a man's world, but I think that's a very, very stark reflection of the reality we unfortunately inhabit. That it is very much a man's world. Man is very much at top of the food chain, and we keep talking about women's rights and how the female is supposedly the deadlier species. And it's such a necessity that these things need to be pointed out, that we need to discuss this, about the problematic aspects of toxic alpha masculinity, which is repeatedly celebrated through literature, through cinema. And I mentioned the mass appeal. Animal was a blockbuster. Dhurandhar is a blockbuster, you know, and see, that itself teaches us a lot about the kind of world we inhabit and the kind of issues that we shouldn't be afraid to address, simply because it will be alienating for the vast majority.
And that is the challenge, that you need to change this aggressively masculinized space. And yet, how do you do that? Once you do that, you kick, oh, you're a woman, you're going to, and you have to, how do you, I guess the dream is, you know, as, you know, somebody who writes queer fiction, and one doesn't necessarily tie it to queer or straight identities, that these will become mainstream stories. If the female stories are the mainstream stories, then we don't need to call it that. You know, just the way the male stories are the mainstream stories, they don't need to be qualified as male. Female stories are not the mainstream stories. And I think that's the future we are fighting for, to make these the mainstream stories. So Priya, let me turn to you with that question.
So actually, Anuja and I were talking about this briefly over breakfast today. So we will continue from there. So what I write about is ancient wisdom for modern times. Because I was, you know, when I studied the Vedic Shastras, I was really surprised at the difference between what we practice today, between society today, and the philosophy that from which we come from. And so this difference was so stark, because if you look at the philosophy is about gender equality, which doesn't exist in society today. And it's troubling that we come from a land where we envisage the male and the female energy as equal, you know? So if you can worship Shiva, but you can equally worship Shakti. And they're both at the same level. you would not say that Shakti is inferior to Shiva or Shiva is inferior to Shakti. So I think in my writing, what I try and say is that we need to actually, if we're talking about equality, gender equality and social equality, we actually need to go back to basics. What has happened is, over the thousands of years, sadly, we have moved away from our core philosophy. Because it is, as Anuja said, it's very unfortunate that, you know, the feminine energy, the feminine power, which is so important, is so integral to society. That there cannot be a society that succeeds without women. You know, women are so part and parcel of the success of any nation, actually. And maybe, you know, now if you see India is going forward in many ways. And I would say, and I don't have any statistics to back this up, but I think that it's also that it's because the women are coming out. You know, you see a rise of women in the workforce, which never was before. You know, would you agree with that? So, yeah, from that point of view, I think in my writing, I like to talk about, you know, where we came from, the thought process we had, and why, and we have lost it. And maybe we need to regain that, where we see Shiva and Shakti as equal.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. I think women are definitely coming out in the workforce, but nowhere as near what they need to be. In fact, one of the differences between India and China is that in China, when people migrate to the cities, you know, it's women, men and women do both. Whereas here, women's workforce is still way lower. Gender and caste, these are the two markers which really kind of distinguish people, and it's actually bringing our GDP down. Women are not getting the jobs they need to, and people of disenfranchised caste are not getting the jobs they deserve, which is bringing the nation down on the whole. And this is something which is happening now, but it needs to happen way more. But I'm really glad you talked about the past, the kind of ancient past of India, and this is a really important point when it comes to what a fluid and pluralistic religion Hinduism used to be. You know, its imagination, its gender fluidity, in Ardhanarishwar. And a lot of scholars have pointed out, and I think it's kind of well known by now, that it's really the British colonial rule, which gave us a kind of a sort of a sanitized and kind of prudish notion of Hinduism, tighter notions of gender behavior, tighter notions of these are basically a Victorian Protestant notions. The Victorian Protestant notions of gender and sexuality were imposed in India in the 19th century. In fact, the same goes for nationalism, the kind of nationalism that is talked about, you know, by sort of right-wing lobbies are very much a Victorian idea of the nation. The idea of India was something very different. So it's kind of ironical, that's a different subject. But I think it's really interesting that we've forgotten what a fascinatingly capacious gender world we had. Just if you talk of the Hindu past, you know, that's maybe some of the parts that I share. But even there. But, you know, the question is, you know, I often think about myth is a very tricky subject, and this is a question for both of you. And I was thinking of something which Shashi Deshpande once wrote, that this whole myth of Shakti is the biggest eyewash. That by elevating us to a mythical status, you're depriving us of real place, real labor, real agency. You know, it's all very well to say that women are Shakti, but what is happening in the workplace? What is actually happening? And this really jolted me, because this was when I was to live in the US. I had a big debate. This was when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were fighting at the primaries. And I was telling my friends that, you see, you know, why is it easier for a black man to become president? Far harder than a woman to go and president. We saw the same thing with Kamala Harris's elections. And one thing I tell them, you see, at least in India, we have this powerful myths of female power. You know, they actually there. But then when I actually read what Deshpande said, I'm like, oh my God, maybe the myths are part of the problem too. Maybe we are too happy with the myths. Maybe we kind of think that, oh, look, this is the nation of Durga and Kali, but in reality, so would you say there's a gulf between myth and reality? And would you agree with Deshpande, who says that myths have become an eyewash for actual women, real women in real life?
That's a fascinating question which you brought up, and so relevant to the present discourse, because I happen to agree and disagree with Sashi, because see, I feel I'm also very proud of goddess lore and how it is celebrated in India. We come from a very, very proud tradition where we say, everything in existence is animated by the power of Shakti. We say that Shiva is Shava, a corpse without Shakti. We say that on one hand, and on the other hand, in the real world, you do not see any such pride of place given to women anywhere at all. So it feels like overcompensation, and it's also easy to weaponize this narrative, because a very problematic goddess versus whore narrative is shaped by this belief system. A woman has to be either a good girl or a bad witch, shall we say? Yeah, so you divide it like that, and you look at a woman and you're the judge, jury and executioner. How is she dressed? How is she carrying herself? Is her life exemplary? So you're set to very, very, very high standards which are impossible to be met. And on the other hand, you just want to, live your life on your own terms. You simply want to go watch a movie with friends, maybe get a drink, and suddenly your character is called into question. A man is a stud if he has plenty of girlfriends. Krishna, Indra in the mythic space, in the real world also. A cricketer has tons of girlfriends, stud. Whereas a girl, she goes to the movie with a friend who's a boy. We don't want to put labels there at all. Immediately you have to answer to every member in your family and the entire world if you don't occupy this rarefied, progressive, liberal space. Unfortunately, that's a very tiny, elitist space, Average women, you will be asked 10,000 questions. You're wearing a salwar and you show up at an event, you're asked, where's the dupatta? Are you looking to be gang raped and groped? In case you use public transport, no? So all this only a woman will deal with, because you are taught, you are held, I call it rape point. When you're 3 years old, you're held at rape point. If you do this, if you stay out after dark and continuing playing, you'll be raped and murdered. So you grow up hearing about this threat of rape long before you know what that word means. So you're intimidated into, being silent, being seen, not heard. You're not encouraged to speak up for yourself. So this is the real world ramification of being held to goddess standards. Sita entered the flames and she emerged on the other side because she was pure. Do you see how damaging that particular narrative is? Because fire burns indiscriminately. Fire doesn't care whether you're good, bad, ugly, man, woman, child. But you've been taught that if you are pure, the flames will not hurt you. And then what happened? Sati happened, Johar happened, and even today in 2025, you go ahead and you go on Twitter and you say it's extremely problematic to celebrate the immolation of women for whatever cause. You will have the right-wing trolls, at your throat. They will say you have no honor. You are a woman who will choose, sex slavery, life in a harem, over the honorable cause. What kind of choice is the choice between rape and death? You send a 6-year-old into the flames. Is that something to celebrate? Is that something to take pride in? But you bring it up in 2025, you still have an issue. So it is highly problematic to tell a woman, oh yeah, you get to choose either the goddess or you get celebrated as a goddess, impossible to emulate goddess, or you get stoned to death, burned to death for being a whore. And we really need to change that way of thinking, because at no point in history has a woman been entirely a goddess or entirely this, that. We are complicated, unreasonable creatures with many shades of grey. Let us just accept that women also, they fart, they do the rando things you're not supposed to do. Let's not get too judgy-fudgy about it.
Well, it seems that, myths have worked a lot better for female politicians than than for regular women, because they have certainly wrapped that, whether it's Mamata Banerjee or Jayalalitha, or they have certainly managed to whip up. But for regular women, I don't think myths have worked quite as well as Anuja is saying. Your thoughts, Priya?
I live in the world of the past, I think, because, and it's interesting to compare, actually, how the epics show, you were talking about the walking through the fire. Actually, there is a longer narrative to that, but it's too much to go into here. But I will take another example where you see the power of women. So, in the Mahabharata, Shantanu, who was the patriarch of the Kurus, he fell in love with Satyavati. Now, Satyavati was a fisherwoman, and he was a king. So there was obviously a huge difference in status then, in that time. But he fell in love with her and he wanted to marry her. Now, her father said that, no, it's very nice, thank you, I'd love to have you as my son-in-law, but if my daughter marries you, then her children won't rule because you already have a son, that was Bhishma. His name was Devavrata at the time, actually, he wasn't Bhishma yet. So he will be the ruler. And so this Shantanu had to say, no, I can't do that because I can't, supersede my son. So he goes back, but he's very upset. And then Devavrata realizes that, his father is sorrowing about something. So he says, what is the problem? And then he goes to the fisherman and he says, that's when he makes the famous promise. He says, I will not get married and I will stay celibate from day forward so that I have no progeny. And your daughters, now just think there of the equality. She called the shots, right? She wanted her, and this was with a king. Not only that, her line ended up ruling, and she decided who was going to be king and who was not. So, I see a big difference in the role of women in the past and the role of women today. And if you look at equality, equality is actually something that we need to start feeling from within. We should not feel this is something we have to fight for. I think the moment you think that, okay, I am weaker, or in some ways I'm a victim or I'm discriminated against, you're putting yourself in a situation of weakness. So I think in today's society, when women are coming out, I think we need to come out feeling that we are equal from inside. Because when you do that, then you will be. Because when you compete with men, it's not a competition. See, if women have strengths, men have strengths. And it's not like, as I say, one is better than the other. Women do lots of things way better than men. Men do some things way better than women. So I think in today's world, as women, we need to feel that we are equal. We are the same. We should not feel that we are unequal.
Yeah, I think the historical perspective is really, really important here. Thank you, Priya, for bringing it up, because no form of power remains the same. Any victory that you win at any given age, one cannot be complacent. If you think of the blatant forms of power that operated through physical domination, for a long time, the focus is moved away from the physical to the mental. Things can be psychological. Like it's often said, patriarchy is not necessarily just practiced by men. It can be practiced by women too. Once a system of power becomes a set of beliefs, a kind of an ideology, it is not necessarily tied to gender. For the most part it is. But there can be patriarchal women too. Just the way, let's hope, there are feminist men. And those things are really important to recognize, because power truly is like cancer. It mutates. Once you find an antidote, it will very quickly change its shape and become something else. And unless we remain vigilant, there's no way we can, it's not about winning it once. You have to keep winning it forever. I know they are looking at us with, sort of with an eye on the clock. But before we concluded, I would love to hear if anybody else in the audience has a comment or a question for the speakers, on the panel.
So, despite progress, women's safety remains a global concern still. So, do you think the problem lies in the laws, mindset, or everyday social conditioning?
It's definitely part of the conditioning. I agree on one hand with what she said that you need to truly claim your space, but the problem is you're working against centuries of social and cultural conditioning, and the prevailing mindset is that girls who stay out of home at night. It never mind that you went for a tuition or you're working in a hospital, you're a nurse, you're on the night shift. Nobody cares about that kind of thing, Everyone's question will be, what was she doing out at that time in the night? That is highly, highly problematic, As, in India, anywhere in the world, women are precious treasures, man. Don't treat them like second-class citizens and they had it coming. Don't have that mindset. It is it behooves all of us to provide a safe space for all the women, irrespective of their age, their profession, their choices. It's never okay to shine the spotlight on the victim's actions. You should look at it overall, and think about how no saying prevention is better than cure. It's not safe, don't go out. That's not the solution. The solution is don't behave in a certain way. Men need to keep it in their bloody pants. They need to be bleeding gentlemen, it's not just for women's rights, it's for the collective good. Good behavior is always for the collective good. Let us never, never, never justify the criminal elements in society. Don't put the pressure on women and say you need to conduct yourself in a certain way if you want to live to a ripe old age. No, that's not how. The narrative itself is highly problematic and you are dealing with it. But we can I also agree with feminist rage today. No, it's overrated. You go on social media and you scream, you're not going to get results. It has to come from a place of strength and this need to work together for genuine change, practical solutions. And he mentioned about feminist men. I think that's lovely. I think that, feminism, feminist activism, we owe so much to the men and women who fight every day to provide equal rights for everyone. That's something we really need to work towards.
Thank you.
And I should say that the literature festival is really a wonderful place to have this conversation, because it's important to have data and facts, but the subtle changes of power, the subtle changes of ideology is actually caught by literature in a way that you don't find in sort of social sciences. And how, like how fiction, how it lets you think as a woman or a man, a gay or a straight man. I think that's a wonderful place to actually start thinking of that awareness. So I think our organizers are looking rather anxious for time, so I'm not going to prolong this. But there are questions in the back. Can we take them, or is it something we need to continue outside? Okay. Or would you like to take all the questions and then have them respond, or we don't have time for that? And sorry, in that case, we've been told we don't have time, but I'm sure we'll all be around, and and you can ask our questions privately. With that in mind, thank you very much for this vibrant conversation, and thank you all for being here.
So now, Felicity, please, Saikat Majumdar, please come to felicitate Priya Arora. It was a very incredible session. Thank you, everyone. It was a very incredible session.
discount on monthly subscription, and grab a free eco-friendly tote bag. This offers is exclusive for